Romantic Tales. Chapter 263. Princess Ding, it's such a coincidence that we meet again? Just as she walked out of a jade shop, a hearty voice came from behind her. Yili raised an eyebrow and turned her head to look at the man standing not far away with his arms crossed. She nodded. Prince Yelu. Prince hasn't entered the palace to see the emperor yet? Yelu Yi smiled indifferently. In any case, the wedding procession will arrive in the capital in a few days. Little Prince will take these few days as a private distraction and won't trouble your country's emperor. Yili nodded and smiled faintly. Since that's the case, I won't disturb Prince Yelu's distraction. Coincidence? In such a big capital, they had just met last night and met here this morning. Wasn't it a coincidence? Yelu Yi didn't seem to notice Yili's alienation and smiled. Speaking of which, this is Little Prince's first time in the Chu capital and it's really unfamiliar. I don't know if Princess can show Little Prince around as a host? Yili smiled faintly, her beautiful face full of apology. I'm really sorry, I don't usually go out and I'm not as familiar with the Chu capital as Prince. I'm afraid I can't lead the way for Prince. Speaking of which, Prince said yesterday that he would be a guest in the Wang Fu. My family's prince specially waited at home this morning for Prince's arrival. Now it seems that he won't be able to wait. The corner of Yelu Ye's mouth twitched and he smiled. Forgive me, Princess. It's just that Little Prince feels that he hasn't met your country's emperor and shouldn't visit the Ding Wang Fu in private to avoid bringing trouble to Prince Ding and Princess. Don't you think so, Princess? Yili smiled faintly. Prince is thoughtful. Ben Fei still has some matters to attend to and will leave first. Seeing Yili turn and leave without hesitation, Yelu Yi narrowed his eyes and his lips hooked up in a smile. A few days ago this one got a piece of top-quality jadeite. I don't know if Princess is interested. Hearing his words, Yili didn't turn around and didn't even pause her steps. Yelu Yi raised an eyebrow and continued, Doesn't Princess Consort want to know what the jade pendant you smashed yesterday was? Yili slowly turned her head. Just as Yelu Yi revealed a smug smile, she said indifferently, Since Prince didn't say anything, it means that he doesn't care. No matter what the jade pendant is, it's already broken. If this consort wanted to know, she would naturally ask the prince herself. Why would she need to hear it from an outsider? Prince, don't you agree? The smile on Yelu Ye's face gradually disappeared as he stared thoughtfully at the departing figure of the woman in front of him. No wonder she's able to obtain Mo Xiuyao's favor. Interesting indeed. Princess Ding, we will meet again. It wasn't until Yelu Ye's line of sight disappeared behind her that Yili stopped and frowned. In the past half a year she had done some basic research on the situation of the various countries. This Yelu Yi may look like a straightforward person on the outside, but as the only one who could compete with the crown prince Yelu Hong among the dozens of sons of the king of the northern tribes, he was naturally vicious and merciless. If it wasn't necessary, Yili didn't want to provoke this kind of person. Wang Fei, that person? Qing Shuang saw that Yili's expression wasn't very good and asked worriedly. Yili shook her head and said, It's fine. Qing Wan and Qing Shuang secretly exchanged a look and saw the worry in each other's eyes. Wang Fei might not have seen it because she was walking in front, but they had all seen the look in that prince's eyes. Qing Wan thought for a moment and said, That prince isn't a good person. Wang Fei should avoid him. Yili smiled faintly and said, Silly girl, there are some people that you can't avoid just because you want to. Unless we don't do anything. Don't worry, I know what to do. Newbie is worrying too much. Qing Wan smiled. She had never seen anything where Wang Fei didn't know what to do. Wang Fei probably already knew how to deal with it. She just needed to protect Wang Fei. Don't think too much. Let's go to Fenghua Lu. Yili smiled faintly. As soon as she stepped into Fenghua Lu, the crisp sound of porcelain falling made Yili stop in her tracks. The shopkeeper of Fenghua Lu was already very familiar with Princess Ding. He hurriedly came forward and said with a smile, This one greets Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please come in. Yili nodded and stepped into the store. She looked inside and asked, Is everything all right? The shopkeeper squeezed out a smile and said with some difficulty, Two guests had a little conflict and disturbed Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please have a seat in this wing. A few days ago the prince sent someone to say that he wanted some good pearls. I had wanted to send them to the Prince Ding mansion in the next few days. I hadn't thought that Wang Fei would come today. As he spoke, he led the way and invited Yili to sit in a private room on the other side. Yili nodded her head nonchalantly. Those who would appear in Fenghua brothel were either rich or noble. The conflict between these people was naturally not something that could be made known to everyone, unlike the trivial matters of ordinary families. Entering the private room and sitting down, the shopkeeper personally carried a few boxes of pearls to Yi Li. Yi Li opened them and looked. As expected, they were all high-quality pearls. Among them was a box of light purple pearls. There were only 19 pearls in the box. What was rare was that each pearl was the size of a pigeon's egg. There was no difference in size, color, or shape. When the box was opened, the light purple light caused the entire room to be covered in a layer of mysterious light. Yi Li said with some shock, "These are night pearls." One night pearl wasn't rare. What was rare was 19 night pearls that were the same color and color. The shopkeeper said with a proud smile, "Wang Fei is right. These are night pearls. One night pearl is worth a city, not to mention a box. And it's the rarest purple color. Is Wang Fei satisfied?" Yi Li nodded with a smile. "Shopkeeper has worked hard." Seeing that Yi Li was satisfied, the shopkeeper's smile became even brighter. It had to be known that he had spent a lot of money and effort to get these pearls. But this kind of treasure wasn't something that anyone could use. If they were sold separately, the value of the treasure would be greatly reduced. The Ding mansion didn't lack money or power. If Princess Ding liked this box of night pearls, then he wouldn't have to worry about this business for at least half a year. Thinking of this, the shopkeeper took out a few blueprints for Yi Li to see. "Wang Fei, please take a look. This is the blueprint that our Fenghua building's best craftsman had specially drawn for this box of night pearls. Is Wang Fei satisfied?" Yi Li looked at the blueprint. It was indeed an exquisite piece of jewelry. If it was made, it would be the envy of all the womenfolk in the capital. But Yi Li didn't plan on making it into a piece of jewelry. Naturally, everyone liked beautiful and dazzling things. But if this kind of pearl was made into a piece of jewelry, then the person wearing it in the dark would be a live target. Although this kind of thing wasn't very practical, it was still good to use it as a collection or as a gift. Thinking about it, Yi Li said to the shopkeeper, "I also want this box of night pearls. Later I will have someone send the blueprint over." "Shopkeeper, you can have someone make it according to the blueprint. Also make a few pieces of jewelry." Although he was disappointed that Yi Li didn't use his blueprint, seeing that Yi Li chose some pearl jewelry, the shopkeeper was very happy. These top-grade jewels were all priceless. It was hard to find and hard to sell. Ding Country's prince was very generous to Wang Fei. Chapter 264. After choosing the jewelry, Yi Li was about to ask the shopkeeper if Fenghua Lu had any good jade when the sound of porcelain shattering came from the side. Yi Li frowned. Before she could speak, there was a woman's cry of pain. Clearly, someone had made a move. "Shopkeeper, who is that?" The shopkeeper's expression was not good. He said in a low voice, "Wang Fei, it is the Shitzi of Marquis Miang Fu and the young miss of the Sun family of the Ministry of Rights. And Miss Yaoji of Qingqing Lane. This one will ask them to leave." Yi Li thought and raised her hand to stop him. She stood and said, "I know them all. I'll go take a look." The shopkeeper didn't dare to say more. He quickly led Yi Li to the private room on the side. When the door was opened, the people inside all turned to look at the door. Yi Li stood behind the shopkeeper and looked inside. There were many pieces of porcelain on the ground. A delicate young girl in yellow was crying in Mu Yang's arms. Sitting next to her was a middle-aged noblewoman with light makeup but a face full of anger. Yaoji was dressed in red. Her face was pale as she stood at the side. Teacups were scattered around her feet. "What is going on?" Yi Li stepped into the room and closed the door. Seeing Yi Li come in, Mu Yang's expression changed slightly. He helped the young girl in his arms up and nodded to Yi Li. "Wang Fei." Suddenly disturbed, the middle-aged noblewoman glared angrily at the door. But when she saw Yi Li's face, she quickly restrained her anger. She stood and smiled apologetically. "Chia Sun greets Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded and said faintly, "Sorry to disturb Furen." She didn't have any impression of this Sun Furen. She was the daughter-in-law of the Minister of Rights, Sun Darren. Her husband was just a fifth-grade assistant minister. Normally she wouldn't talk to Yi Li at banquets. Sun Furen knew that when Princess Ding said sorry to disturb, she was afraid that her movements were too loud and had disturbed Princess Ding. She hurriedly invited Yi Li to take a seat and said with a smile, "Wang Fei is joking. I'm afraid we have disturbed Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please forgive us." Yili looked at Mrs. Sun and Miss Sun next to Mu Yang. She was not very satisfied with their appearances, but the elegant and gentle temperament of a scholarly family made them feel very comfortable. They did not have the arrogance of some noble families. Miss Sun noticed that Yili was looking at her. She blushed and quickly lowered her head to stand behind Mu Yang. Yili smiled faintly. She looked at Mu Yang and said with a smile, "Young Master Mu, what a coincidence. Are you accompanying Miss Sun to choose jewelry?" She had never seen Miss Sun before. Today she saw that the man was talented and the woman was beautiful. They were a perfect match. Don't forget to send an invitation to me and Prince on the day of the wedding. We can also share the joy. Miss Sun blushed. She quickly glanced at Yili and quietly grabbed one of her sleeves. She looked a little gloomy. She glanced at Yaoji, who was standing on the side, and said faintly, "Wang Fei is joking. When the time comes, it will naturally be the honor of Marquis Miang's mansion if Wang Fei and Prince can come." Although his glance was obscure, it could not escape the eyes of Mrs. Sun and Yili, who had been watching him. Mrs. Sun's face suddenly sank. She snorted softly and said, "Thank you for your auspicious words, Wang Fei. It's just that whether this wedding can still be held is another matter." "Mother." Hearing this, Miss Sun whispered in a panic. Yili did not seem to see the situation in front of her. She raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Mrs. Sun, what are you talking about? Although the people in the capital don't know that Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family are family friends. Could it be that the friendship between the two families will be damaged because of a little conflict?" Of course, Mrs. Sun knew that the marriage could not be let go like this. She glanced at Yaoji with disdain and sighed to Yili, "I'm not afraid of being laughed at by Wang Fei. Although we don't usually go out, we have heard a little about the friendship between Marquis Muyang's heir and this girl. In the past we just thought that heir Mu was young and absurd. But now our daughter has not married into the family and heir Mu is making a fuss about taking a concubine. Wang Fei, our Sun family is not an unreasonable family. In the future, when our daughter marries into the family, there is no reason to not allow heir Mu to take a concubine. But this girl called Yaoji is absolutely not allowed. She has been entangled with heir Mu before the wedding and has the title of the #1 dancer in the capital. Not to mention whether Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family can afford to lose face. If she really marries into the family, will I, this disappointing girl, still have a place to stay?" Yili sighed in her heart. She did not know if these two people were enemies in the previous life. They had just separated last night. How did they meet here today? "Why is Miss Yaoji here?" Yili asked softly. Yaoji's face was pale but her back was straight. After hearing Yili's words, she sneered and said, "Could it be that in Wang Fei's mind Yaoji can't come to Fenghua Tower? Why doesn't Wang Fei ask heir Mu and Miss Sun why they are here? Or in Wang Fei's mind, Yaoji has calculated in advance and rushed to humiliate herself?" Yili was startled. Looking at Yaoji's eyes that contained anger, she felt a little apologetic. It could not be said that she did not have the slightest suspicion of Yaoji's actions. Now that Yaoji said it so openly, it could only prove that meeting Miss Sun in Fenghua Tower really had nothing to do with Yaoji. If Yaoji came first, then it was not a coincidence. Someone else deliberately did it. "Sorry," Yili said softly. Yaoji was stunned for a moment, then she sneered and said, "Forget it, it's nothing. People like us are originally inferior to others, aren't we? It just so happens that Princess Ding is also here today. Then let's make it clear. I, Yaoji, swear that I will never marry into Marquis Muyang's household as a concubine. Moreover, after last night, Yaoji's reputation should have spread in the capital, right? Even if the Sun family relents now, I'm afraid Marquis Muyang will never agree, right? Heir Mu, Yaoji does not dare to say that we are even now. Just take it that Yaoji owes heir Mu in this life and will repay him in the next life. As for this life, you and I have nothing to do with each other. Mrs. Sun, are you satisfied?" Hearing Yaoji's words, Yili's heart skipped a beat. She frowned but did not speak in the end. Mu Yang looked awkwardly at the stunning woman in front of him whose pale face made her red dress dim. A trace of pain and helplessness flashed through his eyes. As the only male in this generation of Marquis Muyang's household, he shouldered the rise and fall of the entire Marquis Muyang's household. But he could not stop himself from being attracted by this beautiful and strong woman. It was just that he had underestimated Yaoji's pride and Marquis Muyang's household and the Sun family's reaction to this matter, which led to the current dilemma. Today's matter was even more unexpected. Originally, he was only accompanying his fiancée and future mother-in-law to buy things under the order of his mother, in the name of cultivating their relationship. But he did not expect to meet Yaoji, who had just finished shopping and was about to go out, when he came to Fenghua Building. And when Mrs. Sun proposed to come in for a chat, although he felt a little uneasy, he still had a glimmer of hope, so he did not stop her. But Yaoji looked enchanting and affectionate, but she was stubborn. After a few words, she finally angered Mrs. Sun and attracted Princess Ding, who also happened to come to Fenghua Building. Chapter 265. Yaoji. Looking at Yaoji's resolute face, Mu Yang couldn't help but step forward, wanting to hold her hand. However, his sleeve was caught by someone else. Young Master Mu. Miss Sun's delicate face was full of surprise and panic. Mu Yang's heart suddenly turned cold and he calmed down instantly. Miss Sun was already engaged to him. Once something went wrong with this marriage with the Sun family's strict family rules, even if Miss Sun didn't take things too hard and die, he was afraid that she would have to spend the rest of her life as a Buddha. Thinking of this, Mu Yang's feet couldn't move forward anymore. Yili sat on the side and couldn't help shaking her head. The Sun family and the Mu family wouldn't accept Yaoji at all. It wasn't because Yaoji came from a brothel, but because she was too outstanding and Mu Yang had feelings for her. As for Mu Yang, he wasn't a bad person. He wasn't even a playboy, but he couldn't solve the current situation. If he was a playboy, he could marry Miss Sun and continue to indulge in debauchery outside. Even without Yaoji with his identity, he might be able to find a woman as beautiful as Yaoji. If he was ruthless enough to break off the marriage with Miss Sun, he would be the only heir of the Mu family. Even if Marquis Muyang was unwilling, he would still step back in the end. Yaoji's charming eyes were half closed, hiding the trace of a bitter smile in her eyes. She turned to Yili and said, "Princess, thank you for saving my life last night. Yaoji will take her leave." Her cold eyes swept over the faces of the other 3 people in the room, and she said lightly, "Yaoji is just a prostitute. It's not worth your trouble. Young Master Mu and everyone else, please don't disturb us in the future. Goodbye." Miss Yaoji. Miss Sun, who was standing beside her, suddenly raised her head and called Yaoji. When Yaoji turned back, she looked at Madame Sun and said softly, "Miss Yaoji, young master. If young Master Mu really loves Miss Yaoji, after we get married, please take Miss Yaoji into the mansion. I just hope young Master Mu can give Lian and the Sun family some face." Lian. Madame Sun scolded in a low voice. Mu Yang looked at the petite and graceful girl in front of him in surprise. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. He didn't expect that she would be the first to let him go. Yaoji snorted, turned around and left. Such an arrogant attitude made Mrs. Sun, who was already unhappy, furious. "How dare you? What kind of attitude is this?" Yaoji turned back and said with a contemptuous smile, "I said I would never enter Marquis Muyang's mansion. Do Madame Sun and Miss Sun think I'm playing hard to get? I, Yaoji, am indeed a prostitute, but I'm not that lowly. Yaoji of Marquis Muyang's residence is too high for me to reach and I don't want to. Yaoji can't accept Miss Sun's love, so I won't, thank you." Yaoji. Mu Yang frowned. He knew that it was unfair for her to become a concubine, but this was the best way he could think of to satisfy both sides. Yaoji looked at him coldly. She was totally different from her usual gentle and charming self. Mu Yang sighed softly and said, "Yaoji, can't you suffer for my sake?" The room was silent for a long time. Suddenly Yaoji smiled faintly. Mulang, do you know my name?" Mu Yang was stunned and looked at her with some confusion. Yaoji shook her head and waved her sleeves. She said resolutely, "Unless you marry me openly, we don't have to see each other in this life." "Marry you?" Mrs. Sun stared at Yaoji and sneered. "Who are you to ask the Mu family to marry you openly? Even if Shitsi Mu isn't engaged today, you don't have this qualification. It's Lian'er's magnanimity to accept you. It's your blessing. Don't embarrass yourself." Yaoji said proudly, "So what? Since you can't do it, Shitsi Mu, please go back. Or, do you want to stay here with them and watch me be humiliated?" "Yaoji, you." Mu Yang frowned, his face showing anger and displeasure. Yaoji had always been gentle and understanding. When had she ever been so unreasonable? Yaoji didn't seem to care about his displeasure at all. She glanced at Miss Sun, who was standing on the side, and said disdainfully, "Mrs. Sun is right. I follow you because I want to marry into the Marquis Muyang's mansion. Since you can't marry me, what are you doing here? You want me to bow my head and be a concubine to this little girl who has no appearance or talent and is not as good as me except for a good family background. I Yaoji am not so cheap. There are many men who want me. There must be one who is willing to marry me as his wife. Enough. Mu Yang's face was livid. He pulled Miss Sun, who was tearing up because of Yaoji, and said to Mrs. Sun, "Mother-in-law, let's go back." Mrs. Sun glanced at Yaoji and nodded. She smiled at Yili and said, "Princess, I've made a fool of myself. I'll leave first." Yili nodded. "I won't see you off. Take care, Mrs. Sundate." The three of them pushed the door and went out. From the beginning to the end, Mu Yang didn't look at Yaoji again. Naturally, he didn't notice that a trace of blood slowly overflowed from Yaoji's pale lips. Until the footsteps outside disappeared, Yaoji's body swayed. Seeing that she was about to fall, Qing Shuang and Qing Wan, who came in from the outside, quickly stepped forward to help her to sit down on a chair. Yaoji paused and then looked up at Yili with a smile. "Princess, haven't you seen enough?" Yili shook her head and said softly, "Why do you do that? Is it worth it to ruin yourself like this for Mu Yang?" Yaoji was stunned and smiled bitterly. "I don't know where the love comes from. Goes deep. If I can choose by myself, why should I?" Yili waved her hand and said with a smile, "I understand. If you have seen the sea, you can't see the water. If you don't see the clouds, you can't see the clouds. Elegant people moan for no reason. If you are so hungry that you can't eat 3 meals and have no clothes to wear, you will know that love is false. Ordinary people run around all day for food and clothing. If they don't have love, they won't live their lives." Yaoji looked at her strangely and said, "Princess is also the head of 100 Flowers after Su. How can you think like this?" Yili raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Tacky?" Yaoji didn't speak, but her expression clearly showed a trace of her own. Yili smiled indifferently and said, "When I was still in the boudoir and young, I thought I would become Princess Li. Later, Prince Li broke off the engagement. I think it's nothing. At worst, I can find someone with a lower family background. As long as he has a good character, he can live a normal life. Later, I was appointed to marry Prince Ding. It's difficult to refuse the imperial order. Can I bet the whole Yi family and Su family to disobey the imperial order?" Yaoji naturally knew the situation when Yili joined the Prince Ding mansion. At that time she also sighed for the third Miss Yi. But she didn't expect that in less than a year, the third Miss Yi became the Princess Ding that was envied by all the noble ladies in the capital. And she was the one who was really pitted. What did Princess think at that time? What can I think? Try to make yourself live a better life in the future. Don't tell me you want to commit suicide in a moment of depression? Yili raised her eyebrows and looked at her. Yaoji frowned and looked at Yili. She said with some disbelief, "Has Princess never expected a relationship? How could she not know that she and Mu Yang would not have an ending at all?" But in the dust of life she saw the fickleness of human nature. She couldn't help but want to grasp any trace of warmth and sincerity. She knew that Mu Yang really loved her, but his sincerity couldn't let him give up his responsibility. So what she could repay him was to let him marry at ease and no longer be involved. Chapter 266. Yili sighed and said, "Well, I shouldn't laugh at you. But I think a relationship depends on the efforts of both parties. No matter how much a person gives, this relationship won't last long. I know Mu Yang loves me. I love him too," Yaoji said in a low voice. Yili looked at her with her chin in her hand. "Love is a matter of 2 people. You are 3 people. You love him and he loves you. What about Miss Sun? She's the most innocent one." Yaoji bit her lip and stared at her. "Do you think Miss Sun is really so weak and innocent?" Yili waved her hand and said, "It has nothing to do with whether she is weak or not. She is Mu Yang's fiancée. In this world, not every woman who has her engagement broken off is as indifferent as I am. I heard that the Sun family has strict rules. If Mu Yang breaks off the engagement, Miss Sun has no other choice but to worship Buddha. So even if she is acting, it is just to maintain her legal status. Besides, she didn't commit murder, arson or crime. We can dislike her, but we can't say she is wrong. If it weren't for you and Mu Yang, she could be a real weak and elegant lady, get married smoothly, and be an ordinary wife and the mistress of Marquis Muyang's mansion. Do you think she will be happy to be told by her fiancé that he has someone else in his heart before marriage? Miss Sun didn't torture you to death because of hatred, which proves that she is not a bad person. Hearing her words, Yaoji said blankly, so, is it really my fault? Yili touched her nose uncomfortably. She really couldn't say that it was Yaoji's fault. Yaoji and Mu Yang had known each other for at least 7 or 8 years, but Mu Yang was engaged for less than 2 months. It was naturally not Yaoji's fault in terms of first come first served, but now she had to bear this mistake. Well, it's probably God's will. Don't take it too seriously. Miss Yaoji is talented, beautiful and rich. You don't have to worry about life. Who hasn't met a few scumbags when they were young? Hearing Yili describe him as a scumbag, Yaoji glared at her unhappily. Yili smiled and said, I know he's not a bad person. I was just saying. Yaoji couldn't help but grin and say, although Princess Consort's words are not pleasant to hear, I know you are trying to comfort me. Yaoji thanked him. But why would a princess come to comfort a person like me? I don't often comfort people. If what I say isn't to your liking, please don't mind it. Yili smiled apologetically. As for the identity, since you are Feng San's friend, I can barely be counted as Feng San's friend. Even for Feng San's sake, I can't just ignore it. Yaoji stood up and smiled, thank you, princess. Goodbye. Yili frowned, looked at her and said, you don't look well. Do you want to take a rest before you leave? Yaoji shakes her head and says smilingly, don't worry, I'm really tired these days. I'm going to leave the capital for a rest. Halfway through her words, Yaoji's body softens and falls to the ground. Qing Wan, who is standing next to her, quickly supports her and pulls her back. Yili is also shocked. She asks Qing Shuang to call Qing Yu outside to come in and check. After a while, Qing Yu hurries in to check Yaoji's pulse and looks at Yili with a strange look. Yili says anxiously, what's the matter? Just say it. Qing Yu looks at the woman in red who is in a coma in the chair, looks up at Yili and says, her pulse is slippery. She is pregnant for 3 months. Maybe the fetus is affected, so. The fetus is affected. The 4 words make Yili dizzy. She only feels that thunder is rolling over her head. So, is she trying to separate the father and mother of the child just now? Meddling in other people's business really brings retribution. Although Qing Yu is not a doctor, she still takes a look at Yaoji seriously according to the principle of a doctor's parent's heart. She frowns tightly and says with some dissatisfaction, this is too careless. She is already pregnant for more than 3 months, but she still makes so much trouble. It's really God's blessing that she can keep the child. Yili raises her eyebrows and says, maybe she doesn't know it herself. Qing Yu rolls her eyes disapprovingly. How stupid she is if she doesn't know it when she is pregnant for more than 3 months. It will be obvious in a few days. She can't hide it. Yili nods knowingly. I understand. She's pregnant. She looks at the unconscious person in front of her with some embarrassment. What should I do now? Meddling in other people's business. Yili asks people to send Yaoji back to settle down with her head full of thunder. As soon as she returns to the mansion, Nanny Sun comes to report that someone sent something specially for Princess. Yili opens the box to take a look. It is a piece of jadeite that has only been treated slightly and has not been carved. But just by looking at the flawless green color, she knows that this is a piece of jadeite of the highest quality. Thinking with furrowed brows, Yili has an idea of the person who sent the gift. Raising her head, she asks Nanny Sun, did the person leave a name and address? Nanny Sun says with a smile, Princess doesn't need to worry. The prince has already sent someone to send a gift in return. The prince said that if Princess likes it, you can accept it. If you don't like it, you can just deal with it. Yili nods and says, put it away first. We'll talk about it later. Where is the prince? The prince is in the study. Master Feng has returned. Yili nods and turns to go to the study. Previously, Feng Jiao and them had split up in Yongzhou and led the Black Cloud Cavalry north. He had arrived in Jing half a month later than them. Yili just walked to the door of the study when Mo Xiaoyao's voice came from inside. Is it Miss Li? Come in. Yili pushes open the door and goes in. Feng Jiao stands and says, greetings to Princess. Yili nods with a faint smile and says, Master Feng doesn't need to be so courteous. Feng Jiao looks at Yili and then at Mo Xiaoyao. He felt that there was something different about these two. Princess, just call me Feng San. Yili smiles in response. Walking to Mo Xiaoyao's side, she sits down and says, I'm not disturbing you, am I? Emo Shuyao shakes his head and says, "It's nothing major. Does Miss Li have a problem?" Yi Li recounts her encounter with Yelu Yi. Looking at Feng Jiao standing to the side, she only briefly mentioned her encounter with Yaoji and Mu Yang. She didn't mention Yaoji's pregnancy. It was better for the person involved to decide if they should tell others. Emo Shuyao furrowed his brow at Yelu Ye's obvious attempt to get close to Yi Li. He sneered and said, "It seems that Yelu Hong isn't giving him enough pressure, so he is able to leisurely walk the streets of Chujing. Feng-san, go back and spread the news that Yelu Yi has arrived in Jing and is going to participate in the selection of candidates for the peace marriage." Feng Jiao raised an eyebrow and smiled, nodding silently in response. Once this news was spread, the nobility of Chujing would feel that Yelu Yi was going to drop a level. No one would pay attention to him secretly arriving in Chujing, but participating in the selection of candidates for the peace marriage was going too far. Yes, Dechu State didn't send a real princess for the peace marriage, but the daughters of Dechu State weren't for the northern tribes to pick and choose. Chapter 267. Lily, I'm afraid that you will start to get busy. Have you finished looking through the list of names that I gave you before? Emo Shuyao turned to look at Yi Li and asked in a soft voice. Yi Li nodded. Emo Shuyao said, "You don't need to decide who will go for the political marriage. You just need to recommend 2 or 3 people for the emperor. The final choice will be made by the emperor." Yi Li frowned in confusion. "Like this, won't we offend more people?" Emo Shuyao said with a smile, "That person in the palace has given you this task. How would they give us a chance to not offend people? If we are worried about offending people and randomly choose a girl with a bad family background, not only will the northern tribes make a fuss, that person in the palace may even use your incompetence to change the selection. At that time we will offend more people. Since it is like this, Lily doesn't need to consider the problem of offending people. Choose a few people that you feel are suitable and send them up. As to who the emperor chooses, that is his own business. If he is not satisfied with any of them, that is even better. Let him choose someone else." Yi Li nodded, "I understand. I will carefully look at the family background, intelligence and other aspects of these noble girls." Putting aside all sentimental reasons, it was naturally much easier to choose a candidate based on their status and personal conditions. Feng San's speed was not slow. That afternoon, the news that the northern tribe's 7th prince had arrived in Jing had spread throughout the city. Even the inn that Yelu Yi was staying at was known. Yelu Yi, who had originally wanted to delay his meeting with the emperor of Dechu State for a few days, could only put down what he was doing and go into the palace for an audience. As he cursed Emo Shuyao inside, he also regretted that he had appeared that night to test Emo Shuyao and exposed himself. The next morning, the invitation for the banquet that the palace was holding for the northern tribe's prince was sent to the Ding King's Fu. Emo Shuyao, who had been accompanying Yi Li to practice martial arts in the backyard, raised an eyebrow. He waved his hand to dismiss them and turned to continue teaching Yi Li swordsmanship. "Princess Consort young Master Han and young Master Lung request an audience." Qing Shuang came over to report. Emo Shuyao said unhappily, "Why is he here again?" Now Emo Shuyao was starting to wonder if he had shot himself in the foot by giving Han Mingxi and the Han family to Li Li. Although there was no need to worry about the other party's loyalty, ever since Han Mingxi came to the capital, he came to see Li Li every 2 to 3 days. Now that he had moved out of the Prince Ding mansion and found another place to live, he still did not show any signs of stopping. The jealous Prince Ding naturally forgot that Lung Haoyu, a married man, was also here to see him. Yi Li sheathed her sword and looked back with a smile. "Isn't Mingxi busy discussing the cooperation with Lung Haoyu these days? You probably have some new ideas that you want to ask me." To Han Mingxi, Lung Haoyu was a rich man. On the surface, this hedonistic son of rich parents was in control of more than half of the Prince Ding mansion's business. With his participation, Han Mingxi's business could naturally be bigger. When he thought of this, Han Mingxi seemed to see countless gold ingots flying in front of him. He was so busy these days that his feet did not touch the ground. In fact, the people of the Han family were born with the nature of accumulating wealth. It was not unique to Han Mingyue. "I will also go and listen. Does Li welcome me?" Emo Shuyao asked. Yi Li lowered her head and held back her laughter. She pretended not to see a certain someone's jealous expression and said with a smile, "Since Lung Haoyu is participating, what other secrets can he have from the prince?" In fact, Yili occasionally felt that separating her people and Emo Shuyao's people clearly might not be beneficial to the operation. At the same time, she also knew that this was because the Prince Ding Mansion's future was determined. Emo Shuyao wanted to leave some power for himself so that if something happened in the future he would have something to rely on. So she was very grateful for Emo Shuyao's intentions. In the study, when they saw Emo Shuyao and Yi Li coming in hand, Leng Haoyu and Han Mingxi stood up to welcome them. Emo Shuyao nodded and smiled faintly. No need for formalities. Sit down. Yi Li smiled and looked at Han Mingxi, who looked much better. Mingxi, why are you here so early? Han Mingxi nodded and raised his eyebrows with a smile. There is indeed something. These few days Leng Er and I have almost finished discussing it. Leng Er is in charge of Dechu State. In a few days I plan to go to Nanzhao and Xiling. As for the northern tribes, we can talk about it later. In terms of commercial value, the northern tribes could be said to be the least developed of the 4 countries. Many of the businesses in the Central Plains could not be done in the northern tribes and did not make much money. Yi Li tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "It is said that there are many gold and silver mines in the northern tribes." Leng Haoyu nodded and said, "Indeed, the northern tribes may be remote and bitter, but there are many gold and silver mines. Just look at the northern tribes' nobles. The nobles of the northern tribes, whether male or female, like to use large gold ornaments and decorate themselves like moving gold treasures. The people of the Central Plains despised the barbarians outside the Great Wall for their vulgarity, but who could say that they did not envy them for using gold like silver?" Wang Fei's meaning is? Leng Haoyu said hesitantly. Wouldn't it be too much gold to bite the hand? But the larger mines in the northern tribes are all controlled by the royal family. The northern tribes are very xenophobic. It is basically impossible for us to meddle in this area. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "No, I don't plan on meddling with their gold mines. What is valuable in the northern tribes is not the gold mines or their war horses." Han Mingxi frowned and said, "The restrictions on the war horses of the northern tribes are even more severe than the gold mines. The war horses of the northern tribes were famous all over the world, and the Dechu state did not produce good horses. The horses that the cavalry of the Dechu state used were mostly the horses of the Dechu state and the horses of the northern tribes, and even some of the horses of the foreign countries. Compared to the purebred horses of the northern army, they were still slightly lacking. Fortunately, the territory of Great Chu was not a flat grassland, and the role of cavalry was not as important as that of the northern army. Otherwise, horses would be a huge problem." He knew that Yi Li asked this question for the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. Even though he knew that he was not in a position to say anything, he couldn't help but feel bitter. He glanced at Emo Shuyao, who was listening to them, and said, "No matter how much money we offer, the northern tribes will not sell our horses. Even if they buy them, they will be inferior horses. Moreover, shouldn't the problem of horses be solved by the court or the people in charge of the army? If Jun Wei wants to interfere, it will not be good to alarm the court." Yi Li smiled and said, "No one will be willing to sell openly. But isn't there a business called smuggling?" "Smuggling?" Yi Li smiled and said, "Private transactions without going through customs, there is no need to pay taxes. Small capital, huge profits." Leng Haoyu rubbed his head and said with a smile, "Princess means that we should secretly send people to buy horses? In the northern tribes, selling good horses to people from other countries is a capital offense." Yi Li smiled and said, "No matter which country, there will be people who love money. Merchants value profits. If there is a 50% profit, they will take risks. For a 100% profit, they will dare to trample on all the laws of the world. If there is a 300% profit, even if it is a capital offense, there will be people who will fight with their lives. If capital offenses were useful, there would not be so many crimes in this world. There is no need to be too anxious. The northern tribes have a large territory and sparse population. Food, cloth, porcelain, tea, whatever they want, we will give them. If we can get some herbs and fur, that will be even better. After a long time, we will have our own channels to get what we want." Chapter 268. Han Mingxi's eyes lit up and he smiled. "I understand. The situation of the northern tribes is different from ours and Xiling's southern borders. We can't use the same thinking to deal with the northern tribes. But since we're planning to expand our business to Xiling and the southern borders, we can also send the specialties of Xiling, the southern borders and Dechu state to the northern tribes. Those northern tribes' nobles are all rich and it's too easy to take money from them. It's not that no one wants to do this business, but the journey is too far and the grasslands are very dangerous, so they're all small traders. But if it's us, we don't have to worry about safety. Even if we can't advertise the Prince Ding Mansion, just by relying on the Prince Ding Mansion's military strength, a team will be enough to protect the goods. Emo Xiuyao was also very interested in the northern tribe's warhorses. He smiled faintly. This marriage is a good opportunity. We can send people to the northern tribes to take a look. I'll write to the emperor later and allow the merchants to go with the marriage team to the northern tribes. It'll also be a contribution to the diplomatic relations between the two countries. The other three were silent. Was it a contribution to the Prince Ding Mansion's treasury and the Mahist army's future military strength? Seeing that Emo Xiuyao also agreed, Leng Haoyu smiled. Since that's the case, then it's decided. Brother Han will go to Xiling and the southern borders, and the northern tribes will make another trip. There's still more than a month before we set off, and there's still time to deal with the Dechu state. Han Mingxi nodded indifferently. Yili took out a metal token and threw it to Han Mingxi. Big brother should still be in the southern borders. If you need any help, you can look for him. This is the Yanwang Chamber's Yama's token. Take it with you just in case. If you encounter any difficulties in the West Hill, I'm sure Pavilion Master Ling will lend a helping hand for the sake of the Yama's order. Han Mingxi was naturally familiar with the origins of the Yama's order. He held it in his hand and looked at Yili hesitantly. Yili waved her hand, indicating that he didn't need to say more. Give it to whoever needs it. Since I'm in the Chu capital, I probably won't be able to trouble Pavilion Master Ling. Wouldn't it be a waste if he kept owing her? As for Sickly Scholar, the chances of him coming to the Dechu state aren't too high. And Four had sent news a few days ago that they had just found Master Liang, who had been brought back to Xiling by Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar's threat was limited before they found the emerald grass. Of course, if he insisted on appearing in Chu capital, she wouldn't mind making a move. Even if she didn't kill him, she would cripple him. Presumably, Ling Taihan wouldn't be able to blame her. Leng Haoyu exclaimed, the princess is really generous. She even gave away the King of Hell's order so easily. As he spoke, he glanced at Emo Xiuyao. He thought that the King of Hell's order was given to the princess by the prince to protect her. Seeing that the princess had personally given it to another man, the prince might vent his anger on someone. Of course, it would be best if it was the main culprit, the romantic young master Han Mingxi himself. As the saying goes, it's better to die than to die. Moreover, he was the one who had caused this. Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled. Pavilion Master Ling gave it to him for free. In fact, even if Ling Taihan didn't appear in the end, she wouldn't really want Sickly Scholar's life. Who knew if Ling Taihan would place too much importance on brotherhood and use the power of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce to avenge Sickly Scholar. However, crippling his martial arts at that time was unavoidable. As long as she left Sickly Scholar alive, Ling Taihan wouldn't cause trouble for her out of respect for her elder brother. Leng Haoyu rubbed his nose and lowered his head to drink tea. Could the King of Hell's order be measured by money? That was something that many people would rather spend a lot of money than be able to buy. With the King of Hell's order, as long as you didn't provoke the Emperor of Xiling, you could basically do whatever you wanted in Xiling. After finishing their business, Han Mingxi looked at Yi Li and frowned. Yesterday morning, Yelu Yi sent people to scour the entire capital for the best jade. I don't know what they're for. I've never heard that the people of the northern tribes like jade. Although Yelu Yi sent people to anonymously buy them in batches, his mistake was that he shouldn't have gone to a shop under the Han family's name. Since 2 or 3 shops had their best jade bought by strangers, the shopkeepers naturally wouldn't forget to report it to their masters. As for the Han family, although the Tianyi Pavilion no longer existed in Dechu State, Han Mingxi still recruited many people under his command. It wasn't a big problem for him to investigate the various jade and antique jewelry shops in the capital and the identities of the buyers. Yi Li obviously knew what Yelu Yi was going to do with the jade. She smiled coldly and said, "It seems that the northern tribes are indeed very rich." Thinking about how her trip yesterday was ruined by a certain prince's act of flaunting his wealth, Yi Li's mood was not good. Especially when that person purposely sent a piece over to annoy her. Her eyes turned and Yi Li smiled. Help me spread the news that Ai's imperial concubine wants to find the best jade to give to the prince as a birthday present. Lung Haoyu looked at Emo Xiuyao and then looked at Yi Li. He didn't understand what Yi Li meant. Han Mingxi was the first to react. He waved his fan and said with a smile, so we can take out all the good jade we have and sell it. Once this news comes out, I think that even if the price is doubled, there will be people who will buy it. Also, Wang Fei is right. Aren't the northern tribes rich? I will definitely send the news to Prince Yelu first so that he doesn't fall behind. As for whether the prince of the northern tribes would use the jade as a betrothal gift for the princess or move it all back to the northern tribes, it wasn't their business. Lung Haoyu nodded in agreement. Speaking of which, there hasn't been any rumors about what Wang Fei likes. It has caused us to lose a lot of money. It just so happens that I have a lot of things that I want to sell. I'll sell it to the prince of the northern tribes at a cheap price. But does Wang Fei need to leave a good piece for you? If the rich prince of the northern tribes really took it all, what would happen to the prince's birthday present? Don't look at how the prince usually had a good temper. When he was stingy, no one could stand it. These years he and Feng San had a deep understanding of it. Yi Li glanced at Emo Xiuyao, pursed her lips and smiled. No need, I'm just saying. Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows and sighed sadly. So Prince Ding's birthday is coming soon. Speaking of which, it's such a coincidence. I was also born in June. In the past I spent it with Big Brother, but now... Lung Haoyu's body stiffened and he stared at Han Mingxi vigilantly. Even if this fellow didn't want to live anymore, there was no need to drag him down with him. He had just gotten married. Yi Li smiled. Mingxi's birthday is also in June? Then let's celebrate your birthday in the capital before leaving. Han Mingxi blinked. Will Junwei give me a present? Of course, tell me what you like and I'll prepare it later. Yi Li nodded. With her friendship with Han Mingxi, it wouldn't be right if she didn't give him a present on his birthday. Moreover, with Han Mingxi's current situation, she and Emo Xiuyao had put in a lot of effort. Han Mingxi smiled brightly. That's good. No matter what Junwei prepares, I will like it. After saying that, he fearlessly raised his eyebrows at Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao's calm expression flashed with a trace of light. Li is right. Since Brother Li's birthday is also in June, I and Li naturally have to give him a present. Don't worry, I will definitely give Brother Han a surprise present. Emo Xiuyao's voice could be said to be gentle when he said the last sentence, but the people who heard it felt cold in their hearts. Chapter 269. Lung Haoyu grabbed Han Mingxi and laughed dryly at Emo Xiuyao. Although we haven't known each other for long, we feel like old friends at first sight. Brother Han Mingxi, let's discuss how you want to celebrate your birthday first. Ignoring Han Mingxi's objection, he grabbed him and dragged him out. Han Mingxi, who had first-rate lightness skills and third-rate martial arts, couldn't even struggle before he was dragged out by Lung Haoyu, who looked third-rate but was actually first-rate. At the banquet in the palace, some people were happy while others were sad. In the elegantly decorated palace, noble consort Lu was wearing a snow-white brocade dress with a silver phoenix pattern. The maid behind her carefully avoided the snow-white dress on the ground and inserted a silver butterfly tassel hairpin into her soft black hair. Noble concubine Lu looked at the reflection of her family members in the bronze mirror with an indifferent expression. Noble consort, the princess is here. The maid beside her reported softly. A touch of warmth flashed in noble consort Lu's cold eyes. Let her in. After a while, a young girl in a light yellow dress came in. She stood at the door and looked at noble consort Lu timidly. Then she walked forward and called softly, "Mother." Noble consort Lu turned around and pulled the girl in front of her. Looking at the face that was somewhat similar to hers, noble consort Lu lowered her eyes and suppressed the complicated expression in her eyes. She asked softly, "Ning-er, why did you come to my place at this time?" The girl looked up at noble consort Lu and whispered, "Sister Changle said that she would attend the banquet with Mother. I also want to go with Mother." Noble consort Lu was stunned and frowned. "You are still young. Tonight's banquet is to welcome the prince of the northern tribes. You don't have to attend." Tears of grievance appeared in the girl's eyes. Sister Changle was only 1 year older than her. However, Imperial Mother would often bring her to the palace banquets to play together. However, Imperial Mother had never been willing to bring her along, nor was she willing to play with her. She knew that Mother didn't like her. Noble consort Lu's expression softened when she saw the shock on the girl's tender face. But she soon calmed down and said coldly, don't you listen to mother? Go back. Looking at her daughter's aggrieved and sad appearance, she finally paused and said in a low voice, go back to your own palace. In a while let mama bring you to the palace banquet. The girl raised her hand to wipe away the tears on her face and sobbed, Woo. Mother, don't be angry. Ning-er won't go. Ning-er is going to play with my brothers. After saying that she turned around and stumbled out. It was quiet in the hall. The chief maid beside noble consort Lu frowned and said in a low voice, Your Highness, aren't you being too? Noble consort Lu turned around and said blandly, No need to say more. Help me dress up. Seeing her like this, the palace maid did not dare to persuade her again. She looked back at the door and sighed slightly in her heart. Compared to how the Empress treated the eldest princess, the Empress treated the second princess and even the two princes too coldly. This way, when the princes and princesses grew up in the future, their feelings for the imperial concubine would also be affected. It was a pity that the imperial concubine would not listen to their advice. They could only nimbly dress up for their mistress. Noble consort Lu stood up and looked at herself in the mirror before turning around and saying, Let's go. The banquet was still the same as usual, with songs and dances celebrating peace and prosperity. Yili sat next to Imoshio. She could clearly feel that from the moment she entered the hall, someone's gaze had not left her. Looking up, the person sitting opposite her was the key figure of tonight's banquet, the seventh prince of the northern militant kingdom, Yelu Yi. Seeing Yili looking at him, Yelu Yi raised his eyebrows and raised his wine cup in her direction. That undisguised impudent gaze made Yili's heart sink. She was very unhappy. Ever since she married Emo Shuyao, it should be said that since she could remember, no one dared to look at her with such an impudent gaze. Seeming to sense Yili's anger, Yelu Yi raised his eyebrows and smiled. He turned his head and talked to the person sitting next to him. Yili indifferently lowered her eyes and looked down at her hands. Did Yelu Yi think that she would explode on the spot? A slightly cold hand grasped her hand. Yili raised her head and saw Emo Shuyao's gentle and caring eyes. Emo Shuyao laughed softly and said, Wife, don't be angry. Later I will dig out his eyeballs for you. Yili rolled her eyes at him and muttered, He is the king of the northern militant kingdom's most favored son. If you dig out his eyeballs, won't the northern militant kingdom and the Dechu state fight? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and laughed lightly. Who said that I can only do it in the Dechu state? When we go to the northern militant kingdom, I also have a way to dig out his eyeballs as an apology to wife. Yili shook her head, It's nothing. It's fine as long as you come back safely from the northern militant kingdom. It's better if you don't cause any more trouble. Emo Shuyao looked deeply at her happy expression. Wife, are you worried about me? Your husband is really happy. Yili couldn't help but pinch him. Ever since that night at the Lantern Festival, this person had become more and more pretentious. All day long his wife and husband wouldn't stop talking about each other. Emo Jingqi, who was sitting above, naturally saw the interaction below clearly. His originally handsome face twisted slightly. Emo Jingqi turned back and smiled at noble consort Lu and the Empress, saying, Prince Ding and the princess have been married for more than a year, but they are still as loving as ever. The Empress took a sip of the wine in her cup and smiled lightly, saying, Your Majesty is right. Prince Ding and Princess Ding are deeply in love. Must be another story in the capital. Emo Jingqi nodded and smiled, saying, The Empress is right. My dear wife, what do you think? Noble consort Lu's face was as white as snow and her expression was cold. Your Majesty is right. Wang Xiaorong, who was sitting below noble consort Lu, looked at noble consort Lu and then at Prince Ding and his wife below. She covered her mouth and smiled foolishly, saying, I heard that Sister Lu and Prince Ding were childhood sweethearts. Before she finished speaking, Emo Jingqi's gaze shot to her like a sharp arrow. Wang Xiaorong's heart jumped. She knew that she had said something wrong, but she was so scared that she didn't know what to do. The Empress frowned and said lightly, Wang Xiaorong, you can't drink much. What nonsense are you talking about? Wang Xiaorong's face was a little ugly, but she knew in her heart that the Empress had helped her out. She hurriedly agreed and lowered her head, not daring to say more. Your Majesty. His Highness, Yelu Yi suddenly stood up and spoke to Emo Jingqi in a clear voice. My country's crown princess passed away at the beginning of the year. In consideration of the diplomatic relations between the two countries, father promised to welcome the princess of Dechu state to the northern tribes as the crown princess. This prince doesn't know if I would have the honor of meeting my future sister-in-law. Yelu Ye's words caused an uproar in the hall. The difference between becoming the crown princess of the northern tribes and becoming the crown princess of the northern tribes and becoming the crown princess of the northern tribes was like the difference between clouds and mud. Not to mention those who couldn't see through it, even those who had already seen through this marriage couldn't help but be moved. What was the use of a daughter in a family? Marriage in exchange for short-term benefits or relationships. After all, no one could rely on a woman to maintain a relationship for a long time, right? Even if they knew that the woman who married into the northern tribes wouldn't have a good life, if there were enough benefits, sacrificing a daughter was completely worth it. Yili was a little surprised. She tilted her head to look at Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said in a low voice, "The difference between becoming the crown princess and officially becoming the crown princess is not just a little bit." Who said that the northern tribes people are straightforward and courageous, not scheming and crafty. Chapter 270. Yili suddenly understood. Wasn't that so? For a moment she had forgotten that each country's royal family had something like a golden book. Even the barbarian northern tribes had something similar. Without an official golden book, it was the same as Dechu state's people not having their genealogy recorded in the ancestral hall. Not to mention being the crown princess, even if she was married as the empress, it didn't count. Yili remembered that Emo Xiuyao had people spread the news that Yelu Yi wanted to personally choose someone. Ordinary concubines weren't allowed to be chosen, but the crown princess, the future empress of the northern tribes, wasn't allowed to be seen first. This was under the premise that Dechu state didn't have a suitable princess. Yili looked at Emo Xiuyao with a half-smile, openly mocking him for trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Emo Xiuyao didn't mind. After all, Dechu state wanted to marry a girl to the northern tribes. Since Yelu Yi dared to generously offer the position of crown princess, he didn't mind letting him choose a satisfactory candidate. "Wife, you should worry about Miss Hua. If Yelu Yi personally chooses, he has a 70% chance of choosing Hua Tianxiang. If he knew that Hua Tianxiang and Li had a good relationship, then the 70% chance might even increase to 90%. Yili frowned slightly. Then I'll have to trouble Prince to make sure that the northern tribes prince understands the importance of choosing a crown princess from the royal family. Emo Xiuyao shook his head and laughed softly. If Yelu Yi himself was the crown prince, he might choose a girl from the royal family. But he's choosing for Yelu Hong. Hua Tianxiang isn't from the royal family, but she is the empress's niece. Her status isn't low either. Also, it's very likely that she can drive a wedge between the emperor and the Hua family. Even though old Duke Hua doesn't go to the battlefield anymore, he still has a lot of prestige in the military. Once Hua Tianxiang marries into the northern tribes, the Hua family won't be of any help to Yelu Hong. Yili lowered her brows and pondered for a moment before raising her head to ask, what if he knows that Tianxiang is likely to be of great help to Yelu Hong after becoming the crown princess of the northern tribes? Mo Xiuyao facepalmed and thought for a moment, then said with a smile, "This might work. Let's see if we can trick Yelu Yi." Emo Jingqi was clearly taken aback by Yelu Ye's sudden words. After a moment he recovered with a smile. "Prince Yelu, are you speaking the truth?" Yelu Ye's face was full of sincerity as he said, "Of course it's true. This humble prince has personally come to welcome the princess of Dechu state on royal father's orders. Is this not enough to show my sincerity?" Emo Xiuyao's eyes flashed. He looked at Yili, who was sitting at the side with her head lowered as she spoke to Emo Xiuyao. "Princess Ding, this matter was originally arranged by you. Do you have a candidate in mind?" Yili inwardly cursed Emo Jingqi for being treacherous. She clearly had someone present the candidates in the morning. Why was Emo Jingqi acting as though he didn't know anything? Standing up, Yili respectfully said, "Reporting to your majesty, there are indeed a few candidates in mind. Before entering the palace, I already sent someone to report to your majesty. Your majesty must be busy with work and hasn't had the time to see them." Yelu Yi smiled as he looked at Yili, raising his brows. "Since the candidates haven't been decided yet, may I ask? This humble prince doesn't know if I can participate. Didn't you say that I wanted to personally choose the princess? I'll let you see. However, the one in charge of this matter is Princess Ding. What a pleasant surprise. Yellow Yi looked at the woman across from him, his heart joyful as he thought. Reporting to your majesty, Prince Yelu is, after all, an outsider. This will damage the reputation of our Dechu state's young ladies. A minister whose family's daughter was coincidentally on the list of candidates stood up. Not to mention whether or not she could be chosen. If she was chosen, she would probably never be able to see the crown princess of the northern tribes for the rest of her life. If she couldn't be chosen, his daughter's reputation would be completely ruined. How could she marry in the future? The crown princess of the northern tribes is a big matter. Prince Yelu should be concerned. He just needs to be careful. Noble consort Lu, who had been sitting on the side, suddenly spoke up. The empress couldn't help but frown, glancing at noble consort Lu. Even the empress didn't speak in this kind of situation. A noble consort speaking up, no matter how favored she was crossing the line. Mo Jingqi looked at noble consort Lu in surprise. Noble consort Lu's expression was still cold, sitting upright beside Mo Jingqi as though she hadn't said anything. Looking at his beloved consort, Mo Jingqi raised his brows thoughtfully and smiled. Since my beloved consort says so, then we'll do as Prince Yelu says. Yelu Yi bowed with a smile. Many thanks, your majesty. Mo Jingqi smiled. It's all for the sake of the relationship between the two countries. Prince Yelu doesn't need to be so polite. The emperor so easily agreed to Prince Yelu Ye's request. All the officials present were puzzled. After all, the current emperor cared a lot about his reputation and was close to the powerful officials. This could be said to be lowering his status and was not in line with the emperor's usual behavior. Others didn't care, but Yelu Yi was very satisfied with the emperor of Dechu state. He turned back to salute from afar, laughing loudly. Then in the future I'll have to trouble Princess Ding to give me guidance. Yili raised her head, smiling calmly. I don't dare to give you guidance. Prince Yelu is also of noble birth. I'm sure you won't do anything rude to offend the noble ladies of Dechu state. Yelu Yi smiled but didn't speak. He sat down and drank. The empress sat beside Mo Jingqi. She glanced sideways at the emperor and noble consort Lu, who was as cold as a pear blossom. She frowned slightly and softly said, Noble consort Lu usually doesn't like to meddle in matters. Today she suddenly thought of marrying a princess. Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes to look at the wine cup in front of her, calmly saying, This concubine has overstepped her boundaries. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Mo Jingqi looked left and right at his wife and beloved consort. He smiled at the empress. Noble consort Lu is also concerned about the relationship between the two countries. Your Majesty, please don't blame her. A trace of anger flashed across the empress' brows, but she quickly calmed down. She calmly said, It's fine. I heard that this time, the Lu family also has a young lady in the list of candidates. Noble consort Lu is wholeheartedly devoted to the country. I am not someone who doesn't know the importance of things. However, Your Majesty, that girl Tianxiang is accompanying me in the palace these days. She won't be participating. If Your Majesty chooses her for the marriage, you only need to issue an imperial edict. The Hua family and I won't have any complaints. Mo Jingqi was startled. He and the empress had been husband and wife for nearly 10 years. The empress had never spoken to him in such an obviously angry tone. Thinking about it, he understood that the empress was angry because of her only niece's reputation. Thinking back to the past 10 years, although they didn't have deep feelings for each other, a legal wife was still different. Mo Jingqi couldn't help but wonder if his idea of Hua Tianxiang for the marriage was too much. The empress only had this one niece and Chang'e only had this one cousin. In fact, Mo Jingqi knew in his heart that it was useless to let Hua Tianxiang marry into the northern tribes except to annoy the Hua family. He couldn't even sow discord between the Hua family and the Prince Ding mansion. He had just slapped the empress's face for noble consort Lu. It was nothing to make up for it. Looking at the empress's angry face, Mo Jingqi's expression softened. He patted the empress's hand and said, Don't worry. I'll have someone delete Tianxiang's name later. The empress lowered her eyes, revealing a very faint smile. She said, Thank you, Your Majesty. Chapter 271. Your Highness. Yili absent-mindedly withdrew her gaze and turned back to Mo Shuyao. She smiled and said, it seems that we don't need to worry about Tianxiang. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. Yi Li smiled and said, it seems that the Empress has already helped Tianxiang convince the Emperor. The Empress had no children, but she was able to sit in the position of Empress for so many years in the palace surrounded by powerful enemies. Even the favored noble consort Lu didn't dare to offend her. It could be seen that she wasn't an easy person to deal with. Noble consort Lu had just spoken past the Empress, and the Empress only had to express a little dissatisfaction to make the Emperor relent. But noble consort Lu. Yi Li's clear eyes swept across the snow-robed woman in the hall. She furrowed her brows thoughtfully. The Empress' intelligence isn't inferior to anyone's. She just didn't mean it. On the other hand, Li seems to have some strange abilities. Emo Shuyao laughed softly. Even though they were sitting at the very front, there was still a distance between them and the dragon throne. He could see the expressions of the people above, but Emo Shuyao admitted that he couldn't hear the whispers of the people above in this noisy hall. Yi Li curled her lips and glanced at him. She said generously, that's right. Can't I read lips? Do you want to learn? Emo Shuyao smiled and said, no need. My wife can do it. Yi Li glanced at him and then lowered her head to look at the wine in front of her. She knew that she had revealed too many flaws in front of Emo Shuyao. At first it was careless. She could attribute it to the fact that she had let down her guard after living a peaceful life for more than 10 years. Later she gradually became unwilling to hide in front of him. Sometimes she would even deliberately reveal a side that was different from normal people. In fact, this was also considered a test, but Emo Shuyao never showed any abnormality towards her difference, as if it was natural for her to be like this. Yi Li was surprised, but at the same time she was secretly happy. After all, not everyone liked to wear a mask and hide their identity for the rest of their life. Because it was a welcoming banquet for the prince of the northern tribes, the banquet did not end after the banquet in the main hall. Instead, the emperor led all the concubines, princes, princesses and officials to the highest Jiaxing pavilion in the palace to enjoy the specially arranged fireworks and large-scale singing and dancing performances. Sitting high up in the building, Yi Li looked at the excited emperor and raised her eyebrows disapprovingly. It was wishful thinking to use this so-called grand welcoming banquet to intimidate the ambitious prince of the northern tribes. It was almost enough to trigger his ambition to conquer the Central Plains. After all, the northern tribes could be said to be the poorest of the 4 countries. Towards the Dechu state, which occupied the most fertile land of the 4 countries, they would definitely not have such feelings of reverence. The harsh environment and valiant temperament made them want to plunder without regard for anything else. Princess Ding. Imperial uncle. The Jiaxing pavilion was much more free and casual than the main hall. After sitting for a short while, Princess Changle had already stealthily made her way to Yi Li's side. Many people's gazes were focused on the fireworks in the air and the singing and dancing below. Not many people noticed her. Yi Li lowered her head to look at her. Smiling faintly, she asked, "Why has Princess come here?" Princess Changle blinked her eyes. Leaning close to Yi Li's ear, she whispered, "Imperial Mother wants me to tell you to be careful of noble consort Lu." Startled, Yi Li raised her head to look at the nearby Empress. The Empress's lips curved into a faint smile as she nodded her head slightly. Yi Li nodded her head in thanks. Stroking Princess Changle's small head, she smiled and said, "So you have come to pass on a message from the Empress." "Thank you, Princess." Waving her small hand, Princess Changle generously replied, "There is no need for thanks. This princess also does not like noble consort Lu." "Why?" Yi Li asked curiously. Although noble consort Lu's personality was cold and detached, she would not go so far as to offend a young girl. In the past, noble consort Lu could be considered to have helped her twice and did not harbor any enmity towards her. However, this time, Yi Li could clearly sense that noble consort Lu's attitude towards her seemed to have changed since their last meeting in the palace. This was a very subtle change. On the surface, it was impossible to discern anything. It could only be described as a type of intuition. As for Yi Li, she had always trusted her intuition. This was because it had saved her life countless times on the battlefield. Curling her small lips, Princess Changle replied, "She always acts as if no one is pleasing to the eye. However, Imperial Father always listens to her. He's not good at all. Even when Jining cries, she ignores her. Imperial Mother would never treat me like this. Imperial Mother dotes on Changle the most." The last sentence was definitely meant to show off. Jining? Yili looked at Emo Xiuyao in confusion. Indifferently, Emo Xiuyao replied, the Emperor's second princess, Princess Jining, noble consort Lu's daughter. Yili gazed forward. Only now did she realize that something seemed to be missing from noble consort Lu's side. With the Emperor's grace, all of the imperial concubines, princes and princesses were allowed to turn off the fireworks. As a result, as long as the imperial concubines had children, they would bring their princesses and princes with them. If it could be said that the previous banquets did not allow for the presence of children due to etiquette, now that even the two one-year-old princesses and princes were being carried by their wet nurses, it was strange that noble consort Lu's 2 sons and 1 daughter were nowhere to be seen. In particular, the second princess should be 7 or 8 years old. She was not an insensible child. Was it really as Princess Changle had said, that noble consort Lu did not like her own children? Does Princess often play with Princess Jining? Yili asked with a smile. Princess Changle shook her head. Somewhat depressed, she replied, Jining also does not like to play with me. She only likes to play with her younger brothers. However, she does not allow me to go see them. Imperial Mother says that because I am still young, I do not know how to take care of my younger brothers. However, Jining is even younger than me. Yili pinched Princess Changle's small face, inwardly sighing. The Empress truly protected Princess Changle very well. Assassins! Suddenly there was a shrill cry. Several dark shadows scuttled out from the darkness, pouncing on the stairs. Somewhat speechless, Yili rolled her eyes. Stretching out her hand, she pulled Princess Changle to her side. The stargazing pavilion was immediately thrown into chaos. A large number of imperial bodyguards swarmed towards the Emperor, Empress, princes and princesses. The court officials and the womenfolk below were thrown into chaos, each looking for a place to hide. With a single glance, Yili understood that these men in black were not comparable to the good-for-nothings she had seen that night. Every single one of them was an expert chosen from 100. In a single exchange, the imperial bodyguards upstairs suffered a great loss. The sight of blood caused the womenfolk to shriek in fright. The entire floor was thrown into chaos. Princess Changle hid by Yili's side, only revealing her small head to sneak a peek. Yili patted her forehead and said, "Don't look. Be careful not to be frightened." Princess Changle promptly withdrew. Somewhat worried, she asked, "Princess Ding, will anything happen to my imperial mother and imperial father?" Yili smiled and replied, "Don't worry. Even if something happens to all of us here, nothing will happen to them. With so many imperial bodyguards surrounding them, if anything happened to them, then everyone upstairs would have already been killed by the assassins." One by one, the court officials who knew martial arts stepped forward to meet the assassins. This was not only for their own safety, but also an opportunity to display themselves before the emperor. Emo Xiuyao sat calmly by Yili's side. At some point, shadow guards had appeared, steadily guarding their surroundings. Even if 1 or 2 occasionally broke through their defenses, they would be dealt with by Qingwan Shadow 2 and Shadow 3. In the chaotic upstairs, there was a strange calm on their side. Chapter 272. I say, Prince, do you want to go up and protect the emperor? Yili looked teasingly at Emo Xiuyao as she asked softly. Emo Xiuyao raised his brows and smiled. If I go over now, the emperor won't think I want to protect the emperor. He'll think I want to assassinate the emperor. Yili tilted her head and looked in Emo Jingqi's direction, shaking her head disinterestedly. It was said that the emperor was a person who was both civil and military. How afraid of death did he have to have all the guards upstairs surround him? While keeping an eye on the assassins, he was also keeping an eye on them. It wasn't just Emo Xiuyao. Right now, anyone related to the Prince Ding mansion would be treated as an assassin. Oh, in such a chaotic place, it's not good for the prince and princess to be so relaxed, right? Not far away, Yellow Yi was easily dealing with the assassins. He even had time to speak to Emo Xiuyao and Yili with a smile. Emo Xiuyao smiled faintly. If we can't even deal with a few assassins, what's the use of the palace guards? Yellow Yi laughed loudly. Prince is right. A few small thieves aren't worth Prince Ding personally dealing with. Prince Yellow, please move to the side. The assassins have all been attracted by you. San, who was standing in front of Yili, casually dealt with an assassin as he spoke expressionlessly. Yellow Yi raised his brows. His gaze paused on the man who had fallen in front of San. He smiled and said, "Sorry, I don't know why these assassins always like to bother I. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion are indeed skilled." The man who had fallen to the ground didn't have a single wound on his body. There was only a very thin wound on his neck. There wasn't even much blood flowing out. However, the assassin didn't even struggle before he fell to the ground and died. Even a professional assassin might not be able to do this better. The man in front of him was only wearing the clothes of an ordinary guard, but he appeared to be completely relaxed and calm in the chaotic crowd. Watching the chaotic battle, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked in a low voice, "The assassin is here for Yelu Yi?" A large portion of these assassins had come for Yelu Yi. This could be because Yelu Yi appeared to be the strongest, but Yelu Ye's attire was completely different from that of the Dechu state. It was impossible for these assassins not to recognize him. Mo Xiuyao stared at the handsome man who kept inching closer to them and said, "It might have something to do with him, but the assassins are all from the Central Plains. No matter if it was Yelu Yi or Yelu Hong, they would not send the northern tribes people to cause trouble in the palace. Yelu Yi purposely led the assassins here to test your strength." Mo Xiuyao's strength was well known throughout the world. There was no need to rely on a few assassins to test his strength. Of course, Yelu Yi could not rely on a few assassins to kill him, so he could only do it for Yi Li, who was sitting beside him. Yi Li smiled and said, "Do I need to make a move in this kind of situation?" And San in front softly replied, "Of course not. It's just a few assassins. If Wang Fei needs to personally make a move, doesn't that mean that this subordinate's existence is useless?" Yi Li raised her eyes to look at San and said with a smile, "You are now Wang Fei's left and right hand, not a shadow guard. Can I trouble you not to rush to the front lines?" Hearing this, San's face immediately fell. He still liked the days of being a shadow guard. If an enemy came, he would just rush up and beat them to a pulp. Unlike now, he had to wait for the shadow guards to slip through the net before it was his turn. It just so happened that the shadow guards of the Ding Prince's residence were very qualified. Basically, there would not be any fish that would slip through the net. Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, "I feel that he is not trying to test Li's martial arts, but rather Wang Li's courage." Hearing Mo Xiuyao's words, Yi Li was silent for a long time before leisurely replying, "Marrying into the Ding Prince's residence, could it be that this still does not prove Wang Fei's courage? If it were any other girl who had just been annulled by the Prince of Li and then betrothed to Prince Ding, they might as well hang themselves with a piece of white silk. The fact that she was still alive was enough to prove that her courage was not small, okay?" Not far away a child's cry could be heard. Princess Changle stared blankly for a moment before suddenly crying out, "It's Zhening. Princess Ding." Sitting to the side, Mo Xiuyao waved his hand. 2 shadow guards withdrew from the battlefield without leaving a trace, quickly flying towards the source of the cry. Yi Li looked at noble consort Lu, who was sitting by the emperor's side, and wrinkled her brows. Even they had heard Princess Zhening's cry. She did not believe that noble consort Lu had not heard it. However, noble consort Lu's expression remained as calm as usual. Even the empress frowned as she glanced in that direction. As the birth mother, she acted as if she had not heard anything. In the past, she only felt that noble consort Lu's temperament was cold and untainted. However, looking at her now, she could not help but feel a chill in her heart. A woman who did not even care about the safety of her own daughter. What exactly was she thinking in her heart? Surrounded by layers of imperial bodyguards, the empress calmly said a few words to Mo Jingqi. Mo Jingqi raised his head and looked in their direction. Seeing Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li sitting calmly to the side, his eyes darkened. In a clear voice he said, "Prince Ding, I'll have to trouble you to bring our second princess back." Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. He stood up and smiled at Yi Li before flying out of the building. With Mo Xiuyao's status, it was fine for him to sit and not do anything. However, if the emperor personally ordered him not to do anything, then it would be inexcusable. The empress clearly did not expect that Mo Xiuyao would ask Mo Xiuyao to go save the princess. She stared blankly in the direction of Yi Li, frowning with worry. First, she had to worry about Princess Ding. Her daughter was still young. If Prince Ding was not there to protect her, how could she be at ease? Glancing at noble consort Lu, who was sitting calmly on the side, the empress's face darkened for the first time. Zhen Ning was taken away by the assassins. "Noble consort Lu, aren't you worried at all?" Noble consort Lu calmly withdrew her gaze from the outside of the building and said indifferently, There are so many imperial bodyguards in the palace. Of course they will bring Jinning back safely. Your Majesty, I'm sorry for making you worry. The Empress was so angry that she felt suffocated. She snorted coldly and did not speak anymore. She just kept watching Yili and Changle over there. With the Emperor's temper, he would never allow her to send someone to bring Changle over, even if the one in the chaos was his own daughter. As soon as Emo Xiaoyao left, the besieging assassins became fiercer. Obviously, these assassins were afraid that Emo Xiaoyao had not done anything yet, so they did not use their full strength. Now that Emo Xiaoyao was no longer present, they naturally had to take advantage of the time before he returned to finish off the enemies in front of them. A black-clothed assassin was thrown to the side of Yi Li's feet. Princess Changle, who had a sinister expression on her face, could not help but shriek. Yi Li frowned. Rising, she ordered, "An heir Qingwan, take 2 people to protect Princess Changle." An heir looked at Yi Li with disapproval. Princess Changle tightly gripped Yi Li's clothes, unwilling to let go. Although she was still young, having grown up in the palace, Princess Changle's intuition was superior to that of ordinary people. Being by Princess Ding's side made her feel extremely at ease. Yi Li pulled her hand away, softly saying, "Good child. It is very dangerous to be by my side. Follow the 2 of them to a safe place." Princess Changle blinked her eyes and gazed at her. "Princess Ding, come with me." Yi Li smiled faintly and shook her head. She swept a glance at Yelu Yi, who was fighting skillfully. So long as she moved, Yelu Yi would definitely draw the assassins towards her. Since this was the case, it was better to stand here and deal with any changes by remaining unchanged. The princess must be obedient. Do not let your imperial mother worry, understand? Princess Changle hesitantly glanced at the nearby empress, who was nervously watching her. In the end, she obediently nodded her head. Chapter 273. In the midst of the fight, Yelu Yi turned back to glance at Yi Li, who was still standing not far away. He raised his brows and smiled. "Princess is indeed brave." Yi Li leaned against the pillar, calmly saying, "If Prince Yelu didn't lead them here, I would be happier. Actually, right now I'm so scared my legs can't move." Having his intentions exposed, Yelu Yi didn't feel embarrassed at all. He smiled and said, "Princess Consort found out. Actually, this one only wanted to be a hero saving a beauty. I believe Princess won't blame this one, right?" Hearing this, San raised his brows. He grabbed an assassin with one hand and thrust it forward. The bright light of the blade pierced towards Yelu Yi. Hearing the wind, Yelu Yi nimbly turned around and kicked the assassin who had lost control. "This one, be careful." San expressionlessly raised his hand, apologizing without sincerity. It was a slip of the hand. "Prince, please forgive me." Yelu Yi raised his brows, smiling. "Princess indeed has many capable people by her side. Of course I won't blame you. Yelu Yi, go die." It seemed that this casual fight had finally hurt the assassin's pride. With a loud roar, several black-clothed men threw themselves at Yelu Yi. Their attacks were so fierce that it made one's heart tremble. Yelu Yi finally began to gather his energy to deal with them. Yi Li leaned against the pillar, looking at the chaos around them. She gave Mo Jingqi, who was surrounded by guards, a high degree of disdain. His subjects were being slaughtered by assassins. As the monarch, half of his guards didn't move. He refused to let them leave his side to deal with the assassins. She even said that Mo Jingqi was good at controlling people's hearts. Now it seemed that in the face of life and death he had forgotten everything. Even though it wasn't a life and death situation yet. With a few clear sounds, several more black-clothed men rushed into the building. Yi Li couldn't help but frown. The palace was heavily guarded. How capable were these assassins to be able to infiltrate the palace on such a large scale? And the palace guards. It had been almost 15 minutes, but not a single guard had arrived. Faintly feeling that something was wrong, Yi Li began to move out of the building without leaving a trace. There was a strange sound in the air. Yi Li narrowed her eyes and said sternly, "Let's go. They want to set fire to the building." Just as he finished speaking, an heir who was in the corner had already grabbed Princess Changle and flew out. Behind them, Qing Wan nodded to Yi Li and followed them out. San, who was beside Yi Li, beat back an assassin with a palm. He grabbed Yi Li and jumped out of Zhai Xinglu amidst the rain of arrows. Yi Li found a place to hide and steadied herself. When she turned around, the first and second floors of Zhai Xinglu were already on fire. Apparently, there were some fire arrows among the arrows, and Yili smelled some fuel from upstairs. Moreover, it was the beginning of June. Zhai Xinglu was made of wood and paint, so it was easy to set fire. Everyone was on the third floor. Once the fire started, the already chaotic Zhai Xinglu was filled with endless screams and cries for help. And San saved them. Wang Fei, we didn't bring many people into the palace. And San frowned. Yili said in a low voice, don't worry about me. Save them first. Today those who had the qualifications to ascend Zhai Xinglu were all important officials of the court. Not to mention more than half dead, even a few injured would be troublesome. Helpless, and San could only wave his hand for the shadow guards who had followed behind to go upstairs and save them. Very quickly Mo Jingqi and the other imperial concubines were all rescued by the guards. The guards who had originally surrounded Mo Jingqi and had no place to fight immediately faced the assassins outside. In the darkness no one knew how many assassins there were. The imperial concubines, princes and princesses of high status were still fine, as they had people protecting them. As for the imperial concubines who were not ranked in the rankings, no one would care if they died. Upon landing, the empress looked all around. With great difficulty she finally saw Yili. Without caring for anything else, she hurriedly ran over. Hey, Chang'e. Yili said, Wang Fei, there is no need to worry. Princess Chang'e has already been sent to a safe place. The empress let out a breath, smiling faintly. Thank you, be careful. Yili pulled the empress away, pushing her towards the guards who had followed over. Tilting her head, she dodged the incoming blade and nimbly slipped past the assassin's side. The assassin, who had originally been determined to succeed, only felt a chill in his chest. Dazedly lowering his head, he saw blood spurt out from his chest. Yili turned her head and said to the guards, take Her Highness the Empress to a safe place. The phoenix embroidered on the Empress's clothes was too dazzling. She had only just landed when 2 arrows greeted her. After instructing the guards, Yili's hand flashed and she once again melded into the darkness. Her eyes calmly stared at everything in front of her. Princess Ding is indeed nimble. This humble prince admires you. A voice sounded from beside her, carrying a trace of ridicule. Yili narrowed her eyes, elbowing the person who had suddenly appeared beside her. The person who had come was clearly not an easy person to deal with. He raised his hand, intending to grab her arm. Yili's lips hooked into a cold smile. She quickly pulled out a dagger from her sleeve and slashed it towards the person who had come. The person who had come snorted and dodged to the side. In the blink of an eye, Yili had already sent out a flying kick. She could clearly see that the person in front of her was Yelu Yi, who had run off to who knew where in the chaos. Yelu Yi raised his hand to block, but then let go because Yili's dagger was already a bayonet. Yelu Yi turned around and helplessly said with a smile, Princess Ding, the enemy is right in front of us. Are we still going to have internal strife? He had seen many women who knew martial arts. The women of the northern tribes, regardless of age, all knew a few moves. But this was the first time he had seen a woman with such fierce moves. Compared to a specially trained assassin, she was not inferior. Yelu Yi finally confirmed that now was not a good time to provoke her. If they fought and someone else took advantage of the situation, then it would really be trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Yili flew to the side and looked coldly at him as she said, internal strife? Prince Yelu used the wrong words. It must be that you are not used to the language of the Dechu state. Yelu Yi rubbed his nose and said with a smile, at least we are on the same side now, aren't we? This one only wanted to protect Princess. Now it seems that there is no need. Yili looked at him with a fake smile and said, there is no need to protect me. Prince Yelu should stay further away from me. Be careful not to injure others. Yelu Yi watched as Yili accurately used a dagger to cut the neck of a person who had tried to sneak attack her. He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his neck. This was the princess consort of the Dechu state's Ding country. She really was as vicious as the legendary Prince Ding. But only this kind of woman was interesting. Protect the emperor. The imperial guards of the palace finally arrived. The large group of imperial guards rushed in and caused the originally dark situation to lose their advantage. Yili turned back to look at the one-sided situation. She did not hesitate to turn and head deeper into the palace. Yelu Yi, who had been staring at her, rubbed his chin and followed with interest. Yili quickly shuttled through the gloomy palace, as if she had walked through the palace thousands of times before and was familiar with the layout of the palace. The slender figure nimbly landed under the eaves of a palace. Yili stopped in her tracks and raised her head to look at the eaves behind her. She said lightly, "Prince Yelu, why are you following Ben Fei at this time?" Having been discovered, Yelu Yi didn't dawdle and jumped down from the roof. He said with a smile, "Is Princess going to find Prince Ding? Do you know where Prince Ding is?" Yili said lightly, "This doesn't seem to have anything to do with Prince Yelu. If Prince Yelu has the time to think about this, why don't you think about how to explain why you started assassinating people when you just arrived in the Dechu state?" Chapter 274. Just now at Zhai Xinglu, the assassin had directly called out Yelu Ye's name. At that time many people had heard it. Not many people knew about the assassination at the Lantern Festival, but it did not mean that it would not spread. If there were any important casualties tonight, those noble families would most likely place the blame on Yelu Yi. Yelu Yi said innocently, "This one has come from afar. Who knew that the Dechu state is more dangerous than our northern tribes?" Yili sneered, "I think that compared to the northern tribes, Prince Yelu is more like someone from our Dechu state." Finishing, she did not care about Yelu Ye's expression and turned to quickly walk forward. The two of them, one in front and one behind, walked a short distance in the imperial palace. Probably because of the assassin, most of the guards had gone to Zhai Xinglu. At this time the imperial palace was not as strict as usual. Yili frowned as she walked. If someone were to sneak into the palace at this time, the consequences would be unthinkable. Yelu Yi leisurely followed behind Yili. He could see that Princess Ding was not aimlessly searching the palace, but was going in a certain direction. But with his eyesight he could not find any traces of Mo Xiuyao. After thinking for a long time he could only conclude that it was a secret mark of the Ding Palace that he did not know about. Very quickly, the two of them reached the peach forest at the edge of the imperial garden. Yelu Yi frowned. "Wang Fei, are you sure you didn't find the wrong place?" Yili jumped over the river in front of her and said calmly, "I did not ask Prince to follow." When her feet touched the ground, Yili did not hesitate to enter the peach forest. Yelu Yi shrugged and followed with a smile. "Wang Fei is not worried about this one. Are you not afraid that I will follow behind you and sneak attack?" "You can try." Yelu Yi rubbed his nose and was speechless. Although he was not timid, he was not someone who liked to seek death. Not to mention Princess Ding's strength, he had vaguely sensed that someone was following them the moment they entered the imperial garden. It would have been fine if that was all, but he was still unable to determine who the person following them was. It was purely because of his intuition that he had escaped death countless times since he was young. Since Princess Ding had said so, Yi Lui she knew that the people following them must be from the Prince Ding mansion. He could not help but hate the strength of the Prince Ding mansion. The palace was in a complete mess, but Yelu Yi dared to guarantee that even the most inconspicuous guard in the Prince Ding mansion did not feel the slightest bit of panic. Not long after Yelu Yi entered the forest, he heard voices coming from afar. However, it didn't sound like a fight. Instead, it sounded like a woman arguing about something. Looking at Yi Li, whose expression he couldn't see clearly, Yelu Yi laughed in amusement. Following this woman was indeed the right choice. In the peach blossom forest, Princess Zhen Ning sat on the ground, staring blankly at her mother, who was completely different from usual. Earlier she had been frightened. She clearly wanted to throw herself into her mother's arms and cry, but she could only sit on the ground in a daze, not even daring to cry out loud. Because her mother did not even look at her. Although she was still young, she was extremely sensitive and knew that her mother did not want her to disturb her. Mo Xiuyao looked at the white-clothed woman in front of him and could not help but frown. "Since Princess Zhenning is fine, I will take my leave." Not long after chasing out of Zhai Xinglu, he discovered that the assassins who had kidnapped Princess Zhenning had no intention of harming her. They only wanted to draw him away. However, Mo Xiuyao did not expect that the kidnappers were arranged by the woman in front of him. She actually predicted that Mo Jingqi would ask him to save Princess Zhenning. It seemed that he had underestimated noble consort Lu's influence on Mo Jingqi. "Do you hate me that much?" Noble consort Lu said faintly. Her usually cold and indifferent voice had a hint of hidden bitterness in it. Mo Xiuyao frowned and turned to look at noble consort Lu. "I don't hate you or not." Hearing this, noble consort Lu's face paled. She gently bit her red lips, unable to speak. This answer was actually more rewarding than pure hate. In Emo Xiaoyao's eyes, she did not even have the right to make him hate her, because there was no relationship between them to begin with. Why do you treat me like this? Noble consort Lu asked in a trembling voice. Her cold face had a hint of fragility and sadness. Compared to her usual high and mighty appearance, she had a hint of gentleness and helplessness. She raised her head to look at Emo Xiaoyao and asked unwillingly, "Why do you never look at me? In the past it was Su Zuidi. Now it's Yili. I've never been worse than them. Xiaoyao, why don't you look at me?" Whether it was family background, appearance, or talent, she had never lost to anyone. Even if it was Su Zuidi who was the most beautiful woman in the world, she had never felt that she was more beautiful than her. However, ever since she was a teenager, this man whom she had fallen in love with at first sight had never been willing to look at her more than once. In the past he only looked at Su Zuidi and smiled gently at her. He only accompanied her to play the zither, recite poems and paint. He would never see her by his side. Originally, she thought that since Su Zuidi was no longer around he would not treat anyone differently. But now, as a woman who wholeheartedly admired Emo Xiaoyao, she was more sensitive than anyone else. Emo Xiaoyao treated Yili even more differently than Su Zuidi. Emo Xiaoyao frowned with displeasure. He was not unaware of noble consort Lu's feelings for him. It was just that when he was young he did not care at all. The second young master of the Ding Kingdom was the dream of many women in the capital. The number of women in the capital who secretly admired him was uncountable. Also, because of his mother and father, he would not pay attention to other women when he already had a fiancée. After noble consort Lu entered the palace, it was even more impossible for him to have any thoughts. No matter how much he hated Emo Jingqi, he would not stoop so low as to seduce his concubine. So he completely could not understand noble consort Lu's grievances. Noble consort Lu, be careful with your words. My name is not something that anyone can call. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth. Why are you never willing to look at me? Am I really not as good as your eyes? Emo Xiaoyao frowned. I advise you to respect your identity. I can give up the identity of noble consort. Noble consort Lu raised her voice and cried. Do you think I like being noble consort? None of this is what I want. As long as you, I can give up everything. Emo Xiaoyao frowned as he looked at the woman in white who had clearly lost control. He turned to leave with an indifferent expression. Don't go. Noble consort Lu shouted and threw herself at Emo Xiaoyao, trying to grab his sleeve. However, although her martial arts were not weak, she was not on the same level as Emo Xiaoyao. Emo Xiaoyao did not intend to hurt her and only waved her away. Noble consort Lu's body swayed and finally fell to the ground. Go. Xiaoyao, I have something important to tell you. Emo Jingqi has bad intentions towards the Prince Ding mansion. He wants to scheme against you. Emo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at her and said indifferently, when has the emperor ever had good intentions towards the Prince Ding mansion? In the past you protected Miss Li several times. Today I saved Princess Jinning as I returned the favor. Noble consort Lu, take care of yourself. Our emperor is not a magnanimous person. Chapter 275. Why? What an iron-hearted man. Noble consort Lu is a rare beauty. In a dark corner of the peach forest, Yellow Yi gloated by Yi Li's side. Yi Li glanced at him indifferently. She was surprised to see noble consort Lu here. When she came down from Zhai Xing Lu, noble consort Lu was still by Emo Jingqi's side. How did she escape and appear in the peach forest in such a short time? Noble consort Lu had long known about Emo Xiaoyao's feelings. She also knew about Emo Xiaoyao's feelings. So she wasn't angry to see them. She was just surprised by noble consort Lu's deep love for Emo Xiaoyao. Looking at Princess Jinning, who was still sitting on the ground and not daring to speak, Yi Li secretly shook her head. It wasn't wrong to be deeply in love with a man, but it wasn't good to be careless about it. How careless did noble consort Lu have to be to tell her about her feelings for Emo Xiaoyao in front of her? Although Princess Jinning was only 8 years old in the imperial family, an 8-year-old child wasn't ignorant. What do you think, princess? Do you want to go out and take a look? Yi smiled. Look at how affectionate noble consort Lu is. Doesn't princess have any thoughts? What if Prince Ding is moved? Yili glanced at him disinterestedly. If the prince wants to sow discord, he should use a clever excuse. Did he think she was stupid to go out now? Right now, noble consort Lu was probably just sad. If she appeared in front of her again, noble consort Lu would probably hate her to the heavens. Of course, it didn't mean she didn't hate her now. Yili reminded herself to be careful of noble consort Lu in the future. She was clearly disfigured, but she was still able to recruit people. Obviously, she wasn't completely disfigured. Yili calculated silently in her heart. In the peach forest, Emo Shuyao felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at noble consort Lu, who was crying like a pear blossom in the rain, and turned to leave without hesitation. Emo Shuyao walked out of the peach forest and stood by the riverside for a while before turning his head and saying with a smile, "Lili, since you're here, why aren't you coming out?" Yili strolled out from the peach forest and smiled faintly. "Isn't it because I don't want to ruin Prince's plans?" Emo Shuyao was silent for a while before he said, "I suddenly felt my heart skip a beat. Is Lili trying to ruin Ai's face again?" Yili glared at him fiercely. She would never admit that her thoughts had been guessed by him. Yellow Yi followed behind Yili and leisurely walked out. He looked at Emo Shuyao and said with a smile, "Prince Ding is truly extraordinary. This little prince admires you." Emo Shuyao calmly said, "Prince Yelu is too polite. I cannot compare to Prince Yelu." Before he finished, Emo Shuyao turned to look at the other side of the imperial garden. Yelu Yi said, "It seems that someone is looking for Prince Yelu." Yelu Yi looked over and saw several figures hurrying over. They were clearly the palace guards. It seemed that no matter how afraid Emo Jingqi was of death, he had not forgotten that there was an important guest present. Yelu Yi clicked his tongue and smiled brightly at Yili, saying, "I won't bother the palace guards. Princess Ding, let's meet again tomorrow." After speaking, he leaped into the peach forest and disappeared. This subordinate greets prince, greets princess. Several guards came over. When they saw Emo Shuyao and Yili standing side by side, they were stunned and hurried forward to greet them. Emo Shuyao nodded. "What are you doing?" The leader of the guards said, replying to Prince, "We discovered that Prince Yelu and Princess Ding had disappeared in the chaos. This subordinate has been ordered by the emperor to search everywhere." Emo Shuyao nodded, calmly saying, "Princess is worried about Ai, so she came over to take a look. Just send someone to report to His Majesty that Princess Consort is with Ben Wang. As for Prince Yelu, you can continue to search." The guards naturally did not dare to delay. After bidding farewell to the two, they went to report to Emo Jingqi and continued to search for Yelu Yi. Yili turned back to look at the peach forest, frowning. "Noble consort Lu." Emo Shuyao pulled Yili back, softly chuckling. "Noble consort Lu has nothing to do with this husband. Wife, don't wrongly accuse me." Yili rolled her eyes at him, saying, "Is it okay to leave noble consort Lu inside?" Emo Shuyao said, "Noble consort Lu is not as simple as you think. Do you think she can come here from Zhaixing Lu in such a short time with ordinary skills? If you have a good relationship with the Empress, it's best to remind her to be careful of noble consort Lu." Yili looked at Emo Shuyao strangely. Previously he said he owed noble consort Lu a favor. Although he had just repaid it, he couldn't just turn his back on her, right? Emo Shuyao looked at her with a smile, saying, "Do you think that just because I accepted her, she would really leave with me without anything?" Yili raised her eyebrows. "Wasn't that the case?" Emo Shuyao said lightly, "How could an aristocratic family raise a woman who would do anything for love? If she really did not want anything like she said, how could she give birth to 2 sons and 1 daughter in a row and be the most favored in the harem? She doesn't really want to be with me. She just can't bear that I turned a blind eye to her in the past and now treat you so well." Yili frowned. She believed that noble consort Lu had true feelings for Emo Shuyao. At least it was not completely with a purpose. Such a proud woman begged a man in such a situation when she knew the odds were not good. It was impossible that there was no sincerity and hope in her heart. However, no matter how sincere she was, it was useless. Emo Shuyao already belonged to her. She refused to let anyone else touch him. When they left the imperial garden, Emo Jingqi had already sent people to wait for them at the exit. With such a big thing happening in the palace, it was naturally impossible for them to leave so easily. Everyone went back to wash up and sleep. Although there were many assassins who infiltrated the palace this time, compared to the thousands of palace guards, it was just a drop in the ocean. The reason why they were able to create such a big scene was because they had the element of surprise. However, it could be seen that the palace guards were not as strict as imagined. It was no wonder that the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion secretly looked down on the palace guards. At least, no assassins had ever broken into the Prince Ding mansion in the past 100 years. After being frightened by the assassins, Emo Jingqi naturally could not sleep. He brought the frightened officials to the Dragon Ascension Hall, where political affairs were handled. Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao had just walked to the door when they heard Emo Xiuyao's angry scolding. He was clearly reprimanding the guards for their negligence. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. She remembered that the current commander of the palace guards was Leng Haoyu's elder brother Leng Qingyu. Stepping into the hall, they saw a young man who looked somewhat similar to Leng Haoyu kneeling on the ground, respectfully listening to Emo Jingqi's reprimand. Seeing the two enter, Emo Jingqi finally suppressed his desire to continue scolding. He thoughtfully stared at the two who walked in hand, asking, "Why is Princess Ding together with Prince Ding?" Yi Li smiled faintly. "Reporting to your majesty, Yi Li was worried about my prince's safety, so I brought people to look for him. In a rush, I did not have the time to report to your majesty. Please forgive me." Emo Jingqi looked at Yi Li with a complicated gaze before forcing out a smile. Prince Ding and Princess Ding are deeply in love. It's indeed a legend in Dechu State. It's natural for Princess to be worried about Prince Ding. How can we blame you? Yi Li seemed to be relieved. She smiled and said, "Yi Li thanks your majesty for your understanding." Chapter 276. Is my Princess Zhenning all right? Emo Xiuyao turned his gaze to Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao nodded mildly. Princess Zhenning was a little frightened, but she wasn't injured. Good. Emo Jingqi smiled. Zhenning is Zhen's beloved daughter. If anything happens to her, Zhen and my beloved concubine will be extremely distressed. Although he was smiling, Yi Li did not see the slightest hint of joy in his smile. What does Prince Ding think of tonight's incident? Emo Xiuyao stared at Emo Jingqi and asked. Emo Xiuyao frowned and said thoughtfully, "This official doesn't know, but they shouldn't have come for your majesty. Although most of the guards were protecting the emperor, those assassins didn't try to break through the encirclement to assassinate the emperor. Even if they really killed all the officials upstairs, it would at most make the emperor angry, but the actual impact wouldn't be that big. It was probably just a reshuffle of the cards in the imperial court." But, Official Leng, may I ask why the imperial guards arrived so late? Emo Xiuyao turned around and pointed his gun at Leng Qingyu, who was still kneeling on the ground. Leng Qingyu looked up at Emo Xiuyao and said in a low voice, "At that time the assassins split up and attacked the palace several times. This official was careless and fell for the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Please punish me, your majesty." Careless? Emo Xiuyao said with a cold smile. It seems that Senior Leng has already forgotten the reason for the existence of the imperial guards. Since you know that someone broke into the palace regardless of whether there were assassins at Jiaxinglu, shouldn't the first thing Official Ling should do is to go to Jiaxinglu to protect the emperor? The dignified commander of the imperial guards was actually lured away by a few assassins. I think you should change your position as the commander of the imperial guards. Leng Qingyu's indifferent expression stiffened, but he knew that Prince Ding was right. He had indeed failed in his duty tonight. No matter what Prince Ding said, he had no room to refute. That's enough. Emo Jingqi frowned. Tonight it was indeed Qingyu's fault. He'll be fined half a year's salary. The guards in the palace also need to be reorganized. Next time I won't let them off easily. Emo Jingqi's words were equivalent to not punishing Leng Qingyu. The Leng family was a big family with a big business, and they didn't lack half a year's salary. Even if they were punished, they wouldn't be punished. Originally, if it was someone else, even if they didn't lose their head, they would probably lose their official position. However, since the emperor had already spoken first, it was not good for him to say anything more. Hearing Emo Xiuyao's words, Emo Xiuyao lowered his head and did not refute. Seeing that Emo Xiuyao did not say anything, Emo Jingqi nodded in satisfaction. Tonight's matter should be left to Prince Ding to investigate, right? I'm sure Prince Ding will give me an explanation as soon as possible. Emo Xiuyao frowned and said, "Your Majesty, please forgive me. There is still a month before I leave for the northern tribes. Also, the prince of the northern tribes and his residents have many other matters to attend to. I'm afraid he won't be able to do anything else. Jingqi paused and did not force him. He nodded and said, I didn't consider it thoroughly. Fine, I'll leave it to Prime Minister Liu to investigate. Xiuyao did not have any objections. In fact, even if he did, Jingqi would not listen to him. After leaving the palace in the carriage, Yili looked at Xiuyao strangely. You're helping Ling Qingyu? Xiuyao looked at her with a smile and raised his brows. You can tell? Yili pursed her lips. It's too obvious. Everyone could tell that Xiuyao was deliberately targeting Ling Qingyu in the palace. But at the same time, even if Xiuyao really disliked Ling Qingyu, there was no need to make things difficult for him at that time. And with Xiuyao's personality, if Xiuyao wanted to demote him, he would definitely protect him. If it weren't for Xiuyao making things difficult for him, no matter how much Jingqi trusted Ling Qingyu, he would not have only fined him half a year's salary. How come I didn't know that your relationship with Ling Qingyu is so good? Is it because of Ling Er? Xiuyao shook his head. Ling Er doesn't need me to give him face. Besides, even if I save a beggar on the roadside, he won't ask me to help his elder brother. Yili lowered her brows and thought for a moment before looking up at him. You want to help Jingqi and the Leng family? Xiuyao leisurely leaned against the carriage and said with a smile, My wife is so smart. This is just a small trick. Jingqi will understand it later. However, as long as Jingqi has the slightest suspicion, even if he knows it in his heart, he can't help but guard against Ling Qingyu. This way it will be easier for us to add fuel to the fire in the future. Yili understood that this was paving the way in advance. If Jingqi and the Ding King's manor were at peace in the future, Ling Qingyu would naturally be his confidant. If it was inevitable, Jingqi's trusted aides would naturally be eliminated by the Ding King's manor. Thinking of Xiuyao's long journey in more than a month, Yili couldn't help but frown. For some reason, there was a faint uneasiness in her heart. What's wrong, Lili? Xiuyao looked down at her deeply furrowed brows and asked softly. Yili looked up at him. What are your plans for going to the northern tribes? Xiuyao said with a smile, Don't worry, Lili. The northern tribes won't attack me openly. Although there are many things in the dark, who has the Ding King's manor been afraid of for so many years? Yili frowned. It's better to be careful. Knowing that she was worried about him, Xiuyao took her into his arms and said softly, I know. Don't worry, Lili. I'll come back safely. Yili nodded heavily, one hand unconsciously grasping Xiuyao's lapel. The next morning, while Yili was still practicing martial arts on the training ground, Director hurried to report that the Prince of the Northern Tribes had asked for an audience. Yili also knew that there was only a little more than a month's time. Not only did she have to choose a suitable bride, but more importantly, she also had to teach the bride the etiquette and rules of the royal family. This was not something that could be done in a day. Since the founding of the Dechu state, they had never sent their princesses to foreign countries for political marriages. Even if the marriage was really arranged, it would take nearly a year's time. This time, Jingqi suddenly agreed to the marriage with the northern tribes. The conditions of both sides were relaxed as if it was child's play. Although no one really treated this marriage as a big deal, they still had to go through the motions on the surface. Is the prince here? Yili threw her sword back into the sheath hanging at the side. Director said, Feng San young master came early this morning to request an audience with the prince. The prince has gone out. Yili nodded. Invite Prince Yelu to the hall. Also, send over the list of the capital's noble ladies that was organized a few days ago. Princess consort, this Prince Ding mansion's door is really not easy to enter. Before Chief Steward could answer, Yelu Ye's laughter came from afar. Outside the crescent-shaped door, Yelu Yi narrowed his eyes at the guards of the Ding King's manor blocking his way. His expression didn't change, but he felt regretful that he couldn't force his way in. As expected of the Ding King's manor that had caused so many assassins and spies to return in failure. The security was more than 10 times better than the Dechu state's palace. Looking at the indifferent guards in front of him, Yelu Yi didn't force his way in. As long as these people didn't let him in, he definitely wouldn't be able to break through the encirclement in a short time. Besides, angering the beauty was not worth it. Chapter 277. Withdrawal. Yi appeared behind the guards with Chief Steward Mo and said softly. The guards silently accepted the order and withdrew. Yi raised his eyebrows and sized up the woman in front of him. Different from the previous times, this time Yi was wearing a simple white dress with a green belt around her waist. Her black hair was casually pulled up without any makeup. Without any powder, it showed her picturesque appearance and extraordinary temperament. Yi smiled and said, "Did this one disturb Wang Fei?" Yi looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "If Wang Fei is really worried about disturbing, why force your way in?" Yi smiled innocently and said, "This one just wanted to enjoy the beautiful scenery of Dingguo Wangfu." Who knew that Dingguo Wangfu would be so strict? Yi didn't feel the need to refute this kind of sophistry. She smiled faintly and said, "Wang Fei, please have tea in the front hall. Ben Fei will leave first." "Wait." Yi stepped forward. Chief Steward Mo, who was standing beside Yi, also stepped forward to block Yi. He smiled faintly and said, "Wang Fei, please conduct yourself with dignity." Yi laughed loudly and said, "Was Wang Fei practicing martial arts just now? This one is very curious about the martial arts of the Central Plains. I don't know if I have the honor to exchange pointers with Wang Fei?" Chief Steward Mo said, "Dingguo Wangfu is full of experts. If Wang Fei wants to exchange pointers, this one can choose a few to exchange pointers with Wang Fei. Even this old man can accompany Wang Fei to pass the time." Yi smiled and looked at Yi saying, "I naturally know that Dingguo Wangfu is full of experts. However, this one wants to experience Dingguo Wang Fei's skills." Yi said faintly, "I thought that I had already exchanged pointers with Wang Fei last night." Wang Fei's martial arts were also learned from the Central Plains. Since that's the case, what is there to be curious about? Yi was startled. His martial arts were indeed learned from the people of the Central Plains. However, he had always avoided using the martial arts of the Central Plains. So it turned out that he didn't avoid other people's eyes? Wang Fei has good eyesight. Last night he had hurriedly skipped a few moves. It was truly regrettable. Yi lowered her eyes and turned, saying, "If that's the case, then Prince Yelu, please." Finishing, she turned and went in first. Looking at Yi's back, Yi raised his eyebrows and happily followed after her. After entering the training grounds behind the wall, Yi was slightly disappointed. This training grounds that was hidden in the depths of the back courtyard of the Ding King's manor was no different from other places. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it was only natural. Mo Xiuyao had been crippled for 7 to 8 years, so he didn't need to use the martial arts arena. Furthermore, even if there were any secrets in the Ding King's residence, it was impossible for it to be placed openly in a residence that could be broken into at any time. Although no one had successfully broken into the residence for so many years. What he didn't know was that half a month ago this place was completely different. However, now that Yi had a better choice, she got rid of the simplified versions in the manor. As for her daily training, she didn't need them anymore. Yi walked to the middle of the training grounds and turned around to look at Yi, who was following behind her. She calmly said, "Prince Yi, please." Yi couldn't help but frown. He just realized that this Ding country princess consort wasn't as easy to deal with as he had imagined. He didn't believe that Yi couldn't see that he didn't really want to spar with her. However, she pretended not to know and walked to the training grounds with a serious expression, waiting for him to start. She even put on an expression as if he was a guest, as if she wanted to let him exchange a few moves to fulfill the etiquette of a host. This made Yi not know whether to laugh or cry. Wanting a woman to give way to him during a martial arts competition. If this was spread back to the northern tribes, his crown prince Gij would laugh him to death. He was the 7th prince of the northern tribes with a noble status and extraordinary appearance. Even those bold and generous northern tribes women couldn't help but blush and shy in front of him. However, this woman had been deliberately teased by him several times, but she didn't have the slightest reaction. If a woman could remain calm even when an extraordinary man deliberately tried to be friendly to her, then it had to be said that this woman wasn't easy to deal with. Walking to the training grounds, Yi smiled and said, "Does Princess Consort not take a weapon? Does Princess Consort learn the sword?" Yi said indifferently, "Prince also said that I learned the sword. How would I dare to show off what I'm still learning?" Yi nodded. "I also feel that Princess Consort uses a short weapon very well." wasn't just good. Thinking of the 2 unexpected stabs last night, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Princess consort pleased? Please, Yili said. On the training grounds of the Ding Country King's Fu, Yellow Yi stared intently at the white-clothed woman opposite him. Neither of them made the first move. Looking at the calm and sharp woman in front of him, Yellow Ye's expression didn't change, but he was inwardly shocked. Now he understood why last year's outstanding archery princess Ling Yun was defeated by a Ding Country princess consort who didn't even know how to use a bow. When experts exchanged blows, it didn't just test physical strength, speed, moves, and internal energy. More importantly, it tested the determination to win and the momentum to overwhelm the opponent. Yellow Yi didn't know how high the woman's martial arts were, but he could tell from her calm demeanor and the sharp blade-like aura flowing in her calm eyes that she was not afraid of anything. The mental state of the Ding Country King's Fu was enough to rank her among the top experts. The atmosphere on the training grounds gradually became heavy. Yellow Yi frowned and pulled out a soft sword from his waist. Princess consort please? Yili stood with her hands clasped behind her back, indifferently saying, Prince please? Yellow Yi couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. It seemed that this Ding Country consort had decided to let him make the first move. Before, when he said that he wanted to compete with Yi Li, other than wanting to come in and take a look, it was more of a joke to talk to her. But now that the pretense had become real, he couldn't even not compete. Helplessly shrugging his shoulders, Yellow Yi smiled. Since that's the case, this little prince won't be polite. The soft sword in his hand trembled, drawing a sword flower in the air. Yellow Yi used a very ordinary opening move to stab towards Yi Li. Yi Li frowned slightly, quickly moving to the side. A cold light flashed from her sleeve. A dagger that could cut iron like mud stabbed towards Yellow Yi's heart. After a few moves, Yellow Yi finally put away the relaxed expression in his eyes. He finally understood why Yi Li dared to let him have the first move so generously. It wasn't because she was arrogant or ignorant, but because she really did have the strength to match her opponent. After several moves, Yellow Yi had already discovered that if he persisted in using this kind of tepid sword style, he wouldn't be able to defeat this seemingly delicate white-clothed woman in front of him. Yi Li's moves were swift and fierce, each move hiding a murderous intent. Completely different from the gentle and beautiful moves of the average woman, she didn't care whether the moves looked good or not. The only thing she cared about was whether the moves were useful or not. In the beginning, clearing out the enemy made Yellow Yi's hands and feet somewhat tied. Understanding Yi Li's strength, Yellow Yi didn't want to give in anymore. The soft sword in his hand trembled, his moves also becoming swift and fierce. The northern tribespeople were innately valiant. Originally, they weren't suited to learn such a feminine weapon like the soft sword, but Yellow Yi's swordsmanship was very good. But from that night when he fought with Mu Yang, Yi Li could see that Yellow Yi didn't purely walk the feminine path. His masculine martial arts were also very good. It could be said that he was a rare martial arts master that combined strength and gentleness. Chapter 278. In the martial arts arena, the two of them were locked in a fierce battle. Outside the martial arts arena, Chief Steward Mo focused on the two of them fighting, his deep old eyes filled with worry and relief. The current Ding King Fu seemed to have unlimited glory, but in reality there was a hidden danger. This required a decisive and intelligent Wang Fei. Now it seemed that Wang Fei was not only intelligent and determined, even her martial arts could be considered first class. This made Chief Steward Mo pleasantly surprised and couldn't help but thank the Ding King Fu's ancestors for their blessings. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged over 100 moves. Yellow Yi looked at the calm expression of the woman opposite him and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It seemed that the woman in front of him would always surprise him again and again. He originally thought that even though Yi Li's moves were fierce, she was still a woman and her physical strength was destined to be inferior to a man. Yellow Yi had also seen from the start that Yi Li's internal energy wasn't that deep. As long as the battle dragged on, no matter how exquisite her moves were, it would be useless. But he didn't expect that after so long she didn't show any signs of fatigue, as if she could continue fighting endlessly. Yellow Yi's eyes darkened, the long sword in his hand drew a long arc as he retreated backwards. Yi Li's eyes flashed and she stood still, not chasing after him. Seeing her stop, Yellow Yi secretly sighed in relief. Since he couldn't hurt or kill if he continued to fight like this, regardless of winning or losing, the one who would be embarrassed would be him. I didn't expect Princess Ding to be so agile. Xiao Wang admires you. Yellow Yi laughed as he put the software back on his waist. Yi Li faintly frowned and said, since Wang Fei thinks it's enough, then please go to the front hall to drink some tea. We can discuss proper matters then. Yellow Yi nodded indifferently and Chief Steward Mo, who was standing at the side, came forward to invite Yellow Yi to the front hall. Yi Li returned to her room and changed her clothes. Her conversation with Yellow Yi was naturally a battle of words. This prince of the northern tribes did not match the image of the northern tribes in the hearts of the people of Dechu State. In comparison, he was more like a person from Dechu State and Xiling. He was cunning, sharp, and wouldn't give in when it came to benefits. The two of them discussed the list that Yi Li had prepared in advance for a long time. In the end, they decided to choose Princess Ronghua, the niece of the Lu family's noble consort Lu, and Princess Qingyi, the youngest granddaughter of Mo Jingqi's only uncle, old Jia Prince. However, Princess Qingyi was the only living granddaughter of the old prince. She was only 13 this year. The only reason she was added was to make the name list look better. It was because Dechu State's imperial family always had more males than females. There were no princesses or princesses that could be brought out. But that was all. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of the old prince, or because Princess Qingyi was too young and in poor health. In the end, he would have to choose between Princess Ronghua and the daughter of the Lu family. In the end, Yellow Yi had to personally meet these three people before he could make a decision. Yi Li didn't care about this. It was already good enough that she was able to persuade Yellow Yi to only choose 3 people to meet. If Yellow Yi met all the daughters that were being chosen, the aristocratic families in the capital wouldn't be able to continue living. Presumably, after the northern tribe's wedding procession left, there would be many happy events in the capital. After sending Yellow Yi away, Yi Li didn't have time to get up and return to her room when someone came to report that Miss Yaoji wanted to see her. With Yaoji's status, she naturally couldn't be invited into the manor like Yellow Yi and wait to report to the prince's princess consort. She could only wait outside the manor's side door to see if the princess consort would see her. Yi Li was stunned. She had been so busy these 2 days that she had forgotten about Yaoji. She frowned and said, "Let her in." After a while, Yaoji followed the servant girl in. Different from her usual enchanting attire, this time Yaoji was only wearing an ordinary autumn-colored robe. She looked less beautiful and more delicate, like an ordinary woman of a good family. "Greetings to Princess Consort." Yaoji bowed her head slightly. Yi Li waved her hand and said, "No need. But if you have something to say, sit down and talk." Yaoji raised her head to look at her and thanked her in a low voice. "I didn't think that Princess Consort would be willing to see me." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "If you were so sure that I wouldn't see you, why would you come?" Even though they hadn't interacted much, but Yi Li could see that Yaoji was a very proud woman and wouldn't come to ask for a rebuff. Yaoji stilled and then nodded with a bitter smile, saying, "Princess Consort is right." Yi Li looked at her thin and pale face and hesitated before asking, "Are you well?" Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "What is there to be well about? I shamelessly came today to ask for Princess Consort's help." Yi Li nodded and said, "Speak. If I can help, I won't refuse." Yaoji said, "I plan to close Qingqing Lane, but it's fine if I'm alone, but there are many girls in Qingqing Lane. They are all people with hard lives. If I don't care about them, they may go to other brothels and I don't know where they will end up. Originally, I wronged them. So I want to ask Princess Consort if the Prince Ding mansion is willing to buy Qingqing Lane. Yaoji is willing to sell it at half price as long as you can take care of the old people in Qingqing Lane." Yi Li frowned slightly and said, "Qingqing Lane is known as the #1 brothel in Jing City. If you want to sell it, there will be many people fighting to buy it. Why do you?" Yaoji's smile was bitter. She looked at Yi Li and said, "Do you think I don't know what kind of people do the brothel business in Jing City? I don't know how Qingqing Lane will be ruined in the hands of those people. I hope that the news of Qingqing Lane changing owners will not spread for at least half a year." Yi Li frowned and immediately understood Yaoji's intention. "What do you plan to do?" Yaoji lowered her head and unconsciously stroked her still flat stomach. She smiled faintly and said, "Go to the south to take a look. The climate in the south is much more comfortable than in Jing City, isn't it? I've saved a lot of money these years. Even if I want to live a good life, it won't be a problem." Yili frowned slightly. She wasn't asking about money. Even a dancer at Yaoji's level didn't have to worry about money. But not to mention the instability in the south, Yaoji's body wasn't suitable to travel thousands of li to Jiangnan. Rubbing her brows, Yili changed the topic and asked, Feng San has already returned to Jing City. You haven't seen him yet, right? Yaoji smiled and said, he came to see me yesterday morning but he was very busy. So, hey princess, you don't have to tell him about my messy affairs. Yili said, I thought you had a good relationship with Feng San. Yaoji smiled and said, young Master Feng San is my friend, the only true friend. Princess, you don't have to test me. Young Master Feng San doesn't have that kind of feeling for me. Of course, I really treat him as a friend. We just are in the same boat. Yili softly apologized. She knew Feng Jiao had someone in his heart, but she had never heard Feng San or anyone else mention this person. Maybe Emo Shuyao knew, but after all, this was Feng San's private matter. Emo Shuyao wouldn't take the initiative to tell her and she wouldn't ask. Yaoji shook her head generously and said with a smile, I know you care about me, but you really don't have to tell Feng San about this. Although young Master Feng San appeared to be indifferent to everything, he abhorred evil as if it were his enemy. He was going to find young Master Mu. I've already told him that we've already made things clear, so the marriage between Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family has nothing to do with me. Chapter 279. Do you want to keep the child? Yili frowned. Yaoji had said so much. If she still didn't understand what she meant, she would have lived in vain all these years. It was not that she was cruel, but in this era, not to mention Yaoji's identity, even an ordinary woman would have a hard time if she had an unmarried child, and it would be even worse for the child in the future. Yaoji looked at her, and a touch of tenderness flashed across her beautiful face. She nodded and said, yes, this is my child. Princess, don't worry. Since I have said that I will cut off all ties with Mu Yang, I will never use this child to entangle with him in the future. After leaving the capital this time, I don't plan to come back. I can find a place where no one knows me and live incognito for the rest of my life. Yili shook her head and said, I don't mean that. But have you ever thought about what to do after the child is born? What about your life in the future? Even if you raise the child alone, you will have enough money to spend. But what about after the child grows up? When the daughter gets married, which man doesn't need a clean family background for his future? Yaoji, this world is not tolerant of women. In fact, she was talking about the distant future. In the near future, Yaoji, who was so beautiful and talented, couldn't hide in a remote place. In a prosperous city, it was even more difficult for a beautiful woman to survive alone. Yaoji looked sad and her eyes were full of sadness and helplessness. She stroked her abdomen with her jade-like hand and gritted her teeth. I know all these, but this is my child. Yili was speechless. Women in this era were not as easy as those in her previous life who thought abortion was as easy as eating food. Even though Yaoji was a prostitute, she was still soft-hearted to her own child, let alone the child of her and her beloved man. With Yaoji's temperament, Mu Yang must love her very much if she was willing to give herself to him. Unfortunately, even such a woman could be irrational sometimes. After a moment of silence, Yaoji raised her head and said to Yili, Princess, I understand what you said. Thank you for your concern, but I have decided about the child. I don't know about Qingqing Lane. Yili sighed slightly and nodded. I will buy Qingqing Lane. Since you have made up your mind, I won't say anything more. Take care of yourself. I'll have someone send you the banknotes later. Yaoji said gratefully, Thank you, Your Highness. Yili gently shook her head. Take care. Goodbye. After seeing Yaoji off, Yili was still sitting in the parlor, lost in thought. She didn't even notice when Emo Shuyao came in. Ali, what are you thinking about? Emo Shuyao asked with a smile. Yili shook her head and told her about the purchase of Qingqing Lane, but hid the fact that Yaoji was pregnant. Emo Shuyao naturally wouldn't care about a brothel girl. He nodded and smiled. Qingqing Lane is not a bad place. Even though Feng San often used Qingqing Lane to gather information, it belongs to someone else. He has to consider his relationship with Yaoji. We can buy it, but we can't put it under the name of the Prince Ding Mansion. Yili nodded. Originally, she didn't want the Prince Ding Mansion to buy it. I'll have Mingxi handle it. If it was put under Chu Junwei's name, it wouldn't attract too much attention or arouse suspicion. If someone investigated, they would find that Chu Junwei had a few shops in various places. The most profitable one was in Guangling City. Mo Shuyao naturally didn't care about such a small matter. He sat next to Yi Li and asked, "Did Yelu Yi fight with you today?" Yi Li smiled faintly. It was just a casual exchange. But this Prince Yelu doesn't seem like a northern tribes person. Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and said, "As a member of the imperial family, no matter if it's the northern tribes or the Dechu state, they can't avoid fighting and scheming. For him to be able to stand out among the many sons of the king of the northern tribes, his scheming methods are naturally incomparable. But, to dare to be so presumptuous in the Prince Ding mansion, I have underestimated him. I just don't know if he's prepared to offend I." Yi Li looked at Mo Shuyao in surprise. She thought about it and immediately understood what he was thinking. She just smiled faintly and didn't try to persuade him. The candidate for the political marriage has probably been decided. If it's not Princess Ronghua, it's Miss Lu. But I think Princess Ronghua has a higher chance. When the time comes, there will be more trouble. In terms of status, Princess Ronghua was higher than Miss Lu. In terms of looks, Princess Ronghua was also one of the top beauties in the capital. Moreover, with the Lu family's current status, they probably wouldn't want to marry off a legitimate daughter. After all, even if she became the crown princess, she would still be far away from the emperor. She wouldn't be of much help to the Lu family. What the Lu family needed now was to form alliances with various noble families through marriage. And Princess Ronghua was the beloved daughter of Princess Zhaoran. But so what? Princess Zhaoran couldn't even decide her own marriage, much less a daughter. Mo Shuyao calmly said, "They can do whatever they want. You don't need to care. If it really doesn't work, just push it to the one in the palace. If you're annoyed, you can go visit Imperial Aunt. We can leave the capital for a few days." Yi Li thought of the group of elites she had left in Black Wind Valley. She couldn't help but smile. "That's fine. In a few days I'll be going out to do something." Because Yelu Yi had accepted Yi Li's suggestion to secretly observe the candidates, Yi Li threw this matter to the side. As expected, 2 days later, when the Northern Tribe's envoy arrived in the capital, the results of Yelu Ye's selection were announced. In the end, Princess Ronghua was chosen for the political marriage. Princess Ronghua was obviously the most suitable one in terms of status, age and personality. Although Princess Zhaoran went to the palace to plead with the emperor on the same day, no one knew what Mo Jingqi said to her. Princess Zhaoran finally came out of the palace in a daze and didn't say anything. At that time, Princess Ronghua almost turned the capital upside down. In Princess Ronghua's eyes, Yi Li, the culprit who caused her to marry into a foreign family, naturally couldn't be let off. Unfortunately, King Ding's mansion was heavily guarded. It wasn't a place that could be entered as one wished. At this time, Yi Li had already been leisurely relaxing in Great Elder Princess Shifu's courtyard outside the city. Although Great Elder Princess Shifu was more than 70 years old, she was still in high spirits, perhaps because she paid attention to her daily maintenance and her excellent temperament. Compared with a year ago, she was no different. When she saw Yi Li and Mo Shuyao come together, she beamed with joy. Great Elder Princess's enthusiasm made Yi Li and Mo Shuyao feel a little guilty. After Mo Xuyao's health improved, Yi Li went out for a long time, so they didn't go out of the city to visit Great Elder Princess. On the contrary, Great Elder Princess didn't forget to send them something during the New Year and other festivals. Although it wasn't anything valuable, it was a token of Great Elder Princess's kindness and love. Great Elder Princess took Yi Li to sit in front of her. Looking at Mo Shuyao, who was standing aside, she drove him away, saying that she wanted to have a private chat with Yi Li. Mo Shuyao had to turn around and leave, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Seeing Mo Shuyao leave, Great Elder Princess took Yi Li's hand and looked at her with a smile. Yi Li suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She felt that Great Elder Princess's eyes were a little creepy. Imperial Aunt. Chapter 280. Great Elder Princess looked at her kindly and said with a smile, "I see that you have lost a lot of weight compared with last year. Shuyao doesn't know how to love his wife. How can he let you, a girl, go all the way to Nanjiang?" Yi Li lowered her head and felt a little ashamed. It was she who insisted on going to Nanjiang. However, Mo Shuyao should be the scapegoat. Great Elder Princess looked at her and nodded with satisfaction. "I have heard about what you did in Nanjiang and Yongzhou. You are a good girl taught by Lord Su. This time in Yonglin it's all thanks to you. That child Jingli is really too mischievous. I am old and can't control them. With your help Xiuyao will be much more relaxed. The men of the Ding King's residence are born with a heavy burden on their shoulders. When it comes to Xiuyao it is even more difficult. Fortunately you are here. Yili softly said, these are all things that I should do. Great Elder Princess shook her head and said, not to mention that there are so many noble ladies in the capital city, no one can be better than you in the past King Ding's mansion. However, Yili looked at Great Elder Princess in confusion. Great Elder Princess looked at her with a smile and said, Xiuyao is not young anymore. Shouldn't you care about the children of King Ding's mansion? Now, among all the mansions in the capital city, only King Ding's mansion has no children. Hearing this, Yili's face suddenly flushed. Looking at Great Elder Princess who was full of expectation, Lin Mingya was at a loss for words for a long time. Great Elder Princess looked at her with a playful smile and said, it's normal for you to have children. You have been married for more than a year. Why are you shy? Yili felt extremely ashamed. Was it because she had stayed in this era for too long that she became conservative? However, about children, she really didn't think about it. On the one hand she was less than 16 years old. On the other hand, it was not suitable for her to have children in the current situation. However, she couldn't tell Great Elder Princess directly that she didn't want to have children, so she had to be vague and try to get away with it first. Great Elder Princess just thought that she was shy, so she let it go after a few words. Instead he was planning to remind Xiuyao when he got back. Seeing that Great Elder Princess stopped asking, Yili secretly breathed a sigh of relief and quickly changed the topic to talk about some interesting things in the capital city. Xiuyao only stayed with Yili for 2 days before returning to the capital. The northern tribes' envoys had all arrived in the capital, and as the prince in charge of this political marriage, he naturally could not avoid meeting them. Except for chatting with Great Elder Princess every day, Yili spent the rest of her time in the deep valley under the cliff of Black Wind Mountain. Great Elder Princess knew that Yili went out every day, but she didn't ask about Yili's whereabouts. With the cover of Great Elder Princess, Yili could act more freely. After nearly half a month, when Yili appeared at the foot of the cliff again, she nodded with satisfaction when she saw a group of elites sweating on the drill ground. It was quite good that they could achieve such results in less than a month. As long as they were not in a hurry, they should have received at least 2 months of physical training before they could talk about other things. When the dusty and sweaty soldiers saw Child Chu who was still smiling, they all worried in their hearts. They didn't know the identity of Child Chu, but they all knew the identity of Qin Feng. To be able to have Qin Feng as his personal bodyguard, this young Master Chu's identity must be extraordinary. However, this was not necessary. The important thing was that they had only met Child Chu twice, but each time they remembered him and had a deep impression on them. When they met for the first time, Child Chu mercilessly destroyed everyone's confidence and then watched them all run and crawl on the ground with a smile on his face. When they met for the second time, Child Chu shocked all of them and gave them a task that made them extremely tired in the past half a month. And this time what would Child Chu bring? Everyone, although I haven't seen you for half a month, Qin Feng has reported your training to me. I'm very satisfied. In particular, you are the first batch of people to receive the training and none of you fell behind. But it's just the most basic physical training before. You didn't fall behind, which means that your physical fitness and potential are good. From today on you will start to receive more detailed training. Of course, the original physical training will continue every day. The soldiers couldn't help but wail in their hearts, which meant that they had to squeeze out time from the hard training every day to learn other things. Obviously, the training in the past half a month was effective. At least these soldiers from several different teams now had a very good sense of discipline. Even if they complained in their hearts, they still stood upright on the surface. Yili nodded with satisfaction in her heart and said, "Stand out when I call your name." She lowered her head and opened the file in her hand. Yili called out 7 or 8 names, and the people who were called out walked out and stood in another line. Without exception, all of these people had their own skills and were relatively knowledgeable. Yili looked at the people selected by Qin Feng and said, "You guys wait for me at a training ground 10 miles to the southeast." A few soldiers who were specially selected hesitated, and one of them stepped out and said, "Child Chu, may I ask what we are going to do? Why don't we train together?" Yili smiled and said, "Because I think you guys need some different training." Of course. I should ask for your opinion first. Are you afraid of death? The soldiers suddenly felt insulted, and they angrily stared at Yi Li. If we're afraid of death, we're not a Mahist army. Only cowards are afraid of death. We're not afraid of death, but we want to know what we're going to do. At least we don't want to die without knowing why. Yi Li didn't get angry and nodded with a smile. Very good, I like people who have their own ideas. But now, the first thing you need to do is to obey, the second is to completely obey, and the third is to absolutely obey. Do you understand? Yi Li's calm and solemn voice stunned everyone, and the training ground suddenly quieted down. No matter if it was the soldiers who were called out or the soldiers who were left behind, they all stopped talking and said in unison, "Understood." Very good, then run now 15 minutes. The people who were called out didn't hesitate to turn around and run out of the training ground, disappearing into the dense forest. Yi Li looked back at the people who were left behind and said with a smile, "Don't worry about them, I won't really send them to their deaths. Now you should worry about yourselves. What you're going to learn next is weight training, fully armed swimming training, wilderness survival training, breakout and anti-breakout training, infiltration and anti-infiltration training, as well as infiltration and intelligence gathering training. Your instructor will arrive early tomorrow morning, and the final assessment is set for 2 months later. I can tell you what the assessment is first, so it's fine if you're mentally prepared. Carry a weight of 40 jin, carry a day's worth of army rations, and survive in the wilderness for 7 days. The objective of the mission is to ambush a Black Cloud Cavalry and Shadow Guard allied army 1,200 li away from here. The requirements are that there will be 2 teams searching for you along the way, and they will ambush you at any time. You're not allowed to steal food, cattle, or horses from the farmers along the way. You're not allowed to reveal your identity, and you're not allowed to be caught by the local troops or patrolling soldiers. You're also not allowed to be heavily injured along the way, and you're also eliminated if you don't reach the target by the deadline. Do you understand? The faces of the soldiers in the training ground all turned green. They originally thought that their training was very tough, but young Master Chu always knew how to make it even harder for them. Compared to the later training, the current training was simply like retirement. Chapter 281. Yi Li raised an eyebrow as she looked at them and said, "You should be grateful that it isn't winter right now. Otherwise your days would be even harder. But don't worry, I will make it up to you this winter. Other than that, do you want to add in some heat resistance training?" No, this was what all the soldiers thought. Yi Li was not troubled. The weather in the north isn't very useful. There probably won't be any opportunities this year. After you pass, there will be a chance to bring more comrades to the south to train next year. For now that's all. Qin Feng. Yes, young master. Qin Feng came forward. He was not very shocked by what Yi Li had said because he had already been tortured by Insan many times in the past few days. It was precisely because of this that he began to admire Yi Li even more. His loyalty to Yi Li was almost on par with his loyalty to Prince Ding. In Qin Feng's eyes, the Princess Ding he followed was a peerless genius. You could never imagine what kind of strange ideas Princess Ding had in her head. Just looking at how Princess Ding had used less than a year to train the shadow guards around her to this level, it could be seen how far away Princess Ding was. Thinking of Insan, Qin Feng followed Yi Li into the forest as he silently prayed for the soldiers. "Come with me." Yi Li turned back and said to him. Qin Feng responded and followed, throwing the pitiful soldiers behind him to the back of his mind. He was still struggling in the hands of others. How could he save them? The swamp forest, which was full of poisonous insects, poisonous plants and traps, seemed to be flat ground under Yi Li's feet. Qin Feng carefully followed beside Yi Li, but was somewhat dismayed to find that the princess's movements were always faster than his. Just as he was about to make a move to kill the snake on the treetop, he heard a soft sound. A sharp dart had been fixed on the snake's 7-inch head, and it fell to the ground with a thud. Yi Li walked forward and looked down. She turned back and smiled at Qin Feng. 100-flower snake, not poisonous. It has good practical and medicinal value. Take it back to Mr. Chen. Maybe he will teach you a few ways to identify poisons. Haven't you been learning this recently? Qin Feng nodded. He walked over and carefully put away the dead snake. He asked with some shame, "Wang Fei even knows all snakes?" Yi Li replied without any guilt, "I know most of the poisonous ones. I know after reading a bit more. Don't be afraid. I've looked carefully. There are only 2 kinds of poisonous snakes in this forest and they aren't very poisonous. Even if it isn't fatal when they come in for training, I will find a few skilled doctors to stay here. Qin Feng wanted to say he wasn't afraid, but thinking about the snakes, insects, rats and ants in this forest, he felt that the place Wang Fei had chosen was creepy. Tenli was not a long distance for 2 agile people. A short while later, the 2 appeared at a training ground on the other side of the mountain valley. What surprised Qin Feng was that this training ground, which he had thought would be even harsher, was not as he had imagined. This place was still near the edge of the mountain valley. Because of the terrain, it was even brighter and more comfortable than the bottom of the cliff where they were. The sunlight shone on this place. A small courtyard stood by the stream by the forest. The people who had been called out were standing on the grass in front of the courtyard, waiting for their arrival. Yili swept a look across the 7 people. Even though their faces and bodies had some small scratches, they were not serious. She nodded in satisfaction and said, "It seems that you have trained well. I know that you have doubts about me separating you out. But that is not important. The reason I did this is because your future studies will be different from theirs. Similarly, the missions you will perform in the future will be different from theirs." One of them stood and asked, "What's the difference?" Yili said calmly, "Their future missions will be small-scale fierce battles, such as sneak attacks, rescue, protection, sniping and so on. As for you guys, you may not need to fight. What I need more is your brains. What you need to do in the future is to hide, explore, analyze and pass on information. Of course, it may be assassinations, guards, etc." The soldiers frowned and looked at each other. "Young Master Chu wants us to be spies?" "Spies?" Yili raised an eyebrow and said, "You can say that. This is one of the missions you may need in the future. But I like to call it agents or spies. Compared to their military training, what you need to learn is the languages of other countries and even the local dialects. Psychological analysis, the customs of other countries, disguises, tracking and anti-tracking, the establishment and management of an intelligence network. Also, you need to learn all kinds of tools, fighting, close combat, assassination, etc. You are all chosen from these dozens of elites. Whether it is your family background, ability, knowledge, or intelligence, you are the most suitable candidates. Even though you are different from them, you are still part of the Mahist army. The promises I made last time are still valid. Also, if you die in the line of duty or get injured, the pension and relocation expenses will be 3 times. Of course, before that you have the opportunity to withdraw. Those who withdraw can return to the other side to continue training." The few people were silent for a while. These people were the ones with the most potential in this group. They quickly made a decision. Even though they did not know who this young Master Chu was, they felt that he was different from the other generals. The things he said were both novel and attractive to them. It was as if it would bring a different journey to their future. As men who did not want to be famous, who did not want to be successful. Compared to those illiterate people who only knew how to obey, they thought more clearly. "Reporting to young master, we will stay." Yili raised an eyebrow. She looked at them with a faint smile and said, "You really do not fear death. I will not lie to you. You should know that whether it is spying or training, it is a very dangerous matter. And even if there is no danger to your life, you may never be able to return home or see your family. This subordinate understands. I believe that the prince and princess will take good care of our families." These words were not bad. At least compared to other armies, the Mahist army treated their soldiers very well. Yili nodded and said, "Very good. No matter what, I will guarantee that your families will not have to worry about food or clothing. You can rest as you wish today. The training will start tomorrow." "Yes, young master." In the next few days, Yili would personally go to the valley under the Black Cloud Mountain to personally instruct the people she had chosen. Qin Feng, who had been learning by her side, benefited greatly. He admired Yili's abilities even more. Qin Feng could not understand. Wang Fei was clearly a young woman in her teens. How could she know so many things that people like them had never heard of before? Qin Feng thought of himself as smart, but he had to admit that if he wanted to master everything that Wang Fei taught him, he would need at least 10 or 20 years.